All right, we are live. The Sunday MMA show is back and right on time, as always. Following a pretty crazy card, UFC 265. First, I couldn't wrap my head around if this was a great card or if this was a weird card. The whole atmosphere, even the building, the way it filled up really late with fans, particularly for an MMA event. I thought there was a strange energy, and I didn't know if I was projecting it. I didn't see anything on the Twitterverse, but I definitely thought I was feeling that kind of strange vibe. But as the night wore on, there were a lot of great fights, and as I talked about recently, I've been spending almost the entire time I've been away. I started watching, particularly the UFC, a little differently, where I do grades for every fight, and I'm trying to systematize that. And it's particularly with the lesser known fighters, it really gets me engaged with them, looking into their backstory, and then event by event after they've been in this little system. I've done something like 260 or 270 of these fight grades, and building up a little bit of a catalog, and I feel like I really can sink my teeth into at least the direction different fighters are heading, and pretty interesting. And as I was doing that for the event last night, it was very interesting because the overall quality of the fights were so high, but the type of fight each one was very different. Let me know in the chat here if we've got audio and everything sounds okay. Then I'll get to rambling on about the various things. I'll give a few thoughts about some of the highlights and what stuck out to me from the event, and take questions from the comment section first, and then maybe 15-20 minutes, half hour in, start taking calls if people are so inclined. I appreciate everyone for hanging in there for the show to start today. I certainly appreciate it. As things move forward, it'll get more and more consistent. Okay, the audio is low. Thanks for letting me know. Should be better now. Working through new software, and I didn't want it to be blowing things out. All right. And if you are here, you can start by... Thanks, Keith, by the way, for letting me know about the audio. Let me know if it picked up a little bit. Let me know some of your general impressions or quick questions you have as far as the card. And there were quite a few other items as well in MMA recently. The whole idea that some of the fights that are rumored to either have been booked already and just not announced, or close to being booked, it's pretty amazing. All right. Thanks, Brother Keith. Let me know about the audio. So the first thought, and I'm working through a thing here. Technology. So those of you watching, you'll get to see the way I'm taking notes in these fights, and these are just the notes that I have as far as that I use on my little iPad. Most of the notes I take are by hand in a proper notebook. But anyway, let's start with the main event. And I've talked about it before that Derek Lewis is a bit of a mercurial guy. In fact, this morning I was thinking about it, and he was a Greek or Roman, Janus, the two-faced god. And it doesn't mean what we mean today when somebody's two-faced. It just meant the two distinct personalities. And I feel like we've seen that with Derek's fighting career, where he's had so many fights where he looks like the goddamn Black Beast. And then other fights where even on the walk out, you get the idea that he doesn't even want to be there. And I wasn't sure if that's what I was seeing last night or not. He certainly was very closed down emotionally. And my thought process is he comes out of the back and he was pretty shut down physically. Arms close to his body. He wasn't in any sort of an athletic flow. He wasn't hopping. And he's normally a staid guy. He's not overly dramatic until he is. Sort of like a snapping turtle. The slowest animal in the world until you get your finger too close to its maw, and now you've got an issue. So as Derek was coming out, he was, especially his face, I think the energy from the crowd was pushing emotions into him that he either didn't feel like he should be dealing with because he wanted to stay focused on the fight, or for some other reason didn't want. Maybe he's cognizant. He talked about the fact that there was more pressure in this fight because it was in Houston, and I tend to believe Derek when he says something like that because it's a breakaway. He doesn't have anything really to gain personally from saying that, even if you want to ascribe it as some sort of pre-excuse if he loses. That's really not Derek's style. So I think he was letting us in a little bit. Even with Derek's humor, very dry sense of humor on his part. Very outlandish what he says. That's not dry. But his delivery, and then how he never laughs at his own jokes. And as he was coming out, I could tell he was fighting back some kind of like a smile or even recognition. And that's a difficult thing because you don't want to be overwhelmed emotionally. And we've seen that from fighters. They get so into, I think of particularly Michael Bisping's last fight, one against GSP, but then against Gastelum. And when he came out against Gastelum, even though it was in China, he was looking all around the crowd. And he did the same thing against GSP. And he knew he was near the end of his career. His eye was shot and his body is, he used it hard. And I use the last two fights of Bisping's career, his walkouts, as sort of a baseline to see how fighters are looking at the crowd. And it's one thing to acknowledge the crowd, but when you are trying to force yourself to be in the moment so much and use your mind and your eyes and your ears like a recording device, because you're thinking, in the future, I'm going to want to remember this moment so poignantly, I'm just going to record it. I'm not going to think. I'm just want to be in the moment. We hear people say that all the time. And that's one way of being in the moment, but it's like getting a new car and saying you want the driving experience, but you get in the back seat and have somebody else drive it for you. Well, maybe that's the experience you want, but you're just a passenger. You're just along for the ride. You're now a cameraman. And it's so counterintuitive personally, because you think you're putting yourself in the moment by paying so much attention to the little details, but what it does is it throws you off your psyche. It throws off your sense of, well, like you warm up in the back to get physically ready, and you, whatever your process is as a fighter, you're doing something mentally to get yourself right. So you've thrown that out the window because you've decided to be a tourist in your own moment. With Derek, he was rejecting that. He wasn't looking around. And from that perspective, I thought, okay, well, this is okay. This is good. He's not overwhelmed by the moment in the sense that he's being drowned in his own, just opening up the floodgates and letting all the adulation come in. Of course, what was worrying about it, and this is the whole Janus thing, it's both sides of the coin. He wasn't letting anything in. He was really shut down. And so that's an outlier for him. How can he feel good if his primary concern is not allowing himself to be emotional at all? Well, when you have an outlier moment in your life, whether it's asking somebody to marry you, or you win the lottery, or you're in a huge fight, or you just start your first day at a new job, you're going to feel different in those moments. You have to. And if you're so rigid that you don't allow yourself the honesty of that moment, maybe you can't control how you feel, but you can't pretend that if you just shut everything down, that's controlling how you feel. That's just closing the windows, closing the blinds. Whatever is going on outside is still going on. Whatever your situation inside is still the same thing. You're just blinding yourself to it. And I thought that's what Derek was doing when he was walking out. And that would explain part of why he lacked so much, he so completely lacked aggression. But we've seen fights similar to this one from Derek before. I think there were a lot of things going on, and I was also going back and thinking about the fact that, Derek he's one of the few guys that just never talked about being a champ. And maybe that is something in his mind. Okay, I can be a fighter, but if it doesn't work out, that's okay. But it kept working out better and better. In fact, how many times did he say he wanted to take a break, and then he came right back in less than 3 months, and he's got another big fight, and they're flying him all over the world. A couple years ago, I can't remember, he went to Europe, he went to a few different places, and he really became a workhorse for the UFC. And I think he found a lot of comfort in the role that he eventually established for himself. And even with his first title fight against Daniel Cormier, it seemed like he had found peace with that. Like, okay, if the stars align and I knock this silly fool out and he's not able to wrestle me to the ground for whatever reason, okay, I'm the champ. And then I'll deal with it then. And it was such an absurd booking. It just happened because the UFC was in a big venue, and I can't remember all the different fights that had fallen out, but it lands on DC. And, he was ready to go against Derek, but he said he wasn't ready to go in the rematch versus Stipe. So it was sort of one of those freebies. You're doing the company a good service, and they're in turn going to give you a good payday, and they kind of owe you a favor. And I thought that Derek was comfortable with all of those things as they developed over time, even though he had all these stumbles where he would go into fights. And people say that he plays possum, and we've seen him play possum, but more often than not, we see him get really hurt. And then when the ref doesn't stop the fight, because Derek has a reputation, we saw it last night, because Derek's got this reputation for playing possum, he finally gets kind of pissed off and says, okay, well, if you're not going to stop the fight, I got to try to stop this myself, because I'm not going to tap out. I don't think that's ever occurred to Derek that he tapped to strikes. And we saw that last night, but we've seen it in other fights as well. I'm trying to remember if it was the Mark Hunt fight or a few where he gets kicked in that belly of his, and where the foot goes that no sit-up has ever improved, it just doesn't sit well with him. It's not his thing to take body shots. And he's not really giving up. I think the will just goes out of him in the moment. And then he kind of rides it out and he comes back to himself. He's like, all right, I'm going to jump back in it. And we've seen him come back in fights from that, or at least go much further. And I think that's what Big Dan was trying to do. He was really pleading with Derek, which also sort of told me that he had this inside view of what was going on with Derek, and either felt that Derek shouldn't have been as hurt as he was, or that Derek again was maybe playing possum. So all of that to say, I've always had a little bit of mixed emotions, and I put a fair bit of time into a whole episode about this subject of being uncomfortable watching Derek fight, because so many times he seems like he doesn't want to be in there. And then he went on this run that he's been on recently, and I felt like, okay, he's in better shape, he's working out harder, and you could see it in his body. But then again, last night, he didn't look as physically solid as I thought he had recently. So with the lead up and the walkout, and then him standing there just before the fight started, I had that bad feeling like, oh, this is the Derek that doesn't want to be in there. But you can't take anything, none of that's an excuse, and none of that should take anything away from what Cyril Gane did. Very impressed with him. I wondered if the moment would be a little too big for him. And I wondered just how broadly he would employ the French defense. Fleet of foot. And he did early on, but once he had assessed the actual ability of Lewis to deliver danger, he quickly closed the circle of violence and safety. And he just kept bringing it in and bringing himself into the fray. And he entered into the fray several times. I had wondered in Gane's last fight against Rosenstruck just how uncomfortable he was with the brutality of being a heavyweight, and how much of his hesitancy to enter the fray was just purely a smart calculation. Because I think both things are reasonable, and a combination of the two is probably the most likely. And I thought we'd get a pretty good look at where he was coming from against Lewis. And I was very impressed. Beyond the skills, I think we all knew the skills on display from Cyril Gane, and what he can do at heavyweight. Usually the hyperbole gets a little over the top when somebody has some success, as he has, particularly in the divisions that don't have the depth. But he's actually shown everything, or at least part of what people are talking about with the guy. He does have amazing movement. And you don't have to put the caveat for a heavyweight. He is a heavyweight, but he has great movement. His movement is as effective as virtually anybody's, regardless of weight class or size. Very impressive. And he was willing, I don't know, he's a funny guy. Over time, I'm very excited to spend more time, particularly now that he's engaging in more English conversations. Just from the jump, though, he's a difficult guy for me to read. and I'm sure some of it's cultural, because he shows signs of introversion, but he also has all kinds of signs of confidence, and I mean beyond what he does in the cage, and those aren't necessarily exclusive to being more of an extrovert, but he shows so much of being either. Even when he was coming out, he had this kind of weird smirk on his face, speaking of Cyril Gane. And throughout the week, he seemed to be showing that he was dismissive, not necessarily arrogant in the ego sense, but above, well, basically what he ended up showing on Saturday night, that it was not going to be a contest, and it was a little bit silly for people to be asking him questions like, oh, how are you going to handle his power and all that. So I'm not sure if it was a little bit of naivete, I'm saying the word wrong, naivete, there we go, and how much of it was just being early in his career and having so much success. I think a lot of it also, you've got to think about Ferdinand Lopez. I think that guy is a sneaky good psychologist or psychiatrist, because he, at least in the two instances we've seen, he makes his guys believe that nobody has a chance against them. Which brings up the question. So all the foreshadowing for the so-called unification match between Gane and Ngannou. So I'm not sure. I felt like I understood some of the dynamic between Lopez, the coach, and Ngannou. And I've done a fair bit of work on that. I don't understand it near as well with Gane, but very interesting. He's almost like, if you think about them as being more of a paternal relationship, and that can be overstated. But I think it works in this case, not just because it's a coach and an athlete, but because the two instances and just how much it seems Ferdinand is involved in their lives. And Ngannou was very much the rebellious, violent son that doesn't want to be, he doesn't want to be locked in. Like, he was breaking out all the time. If you go back and watch the embeddeds from the times that Ngannou was fighting on pay-per-view cards, he just, or watch the live sparring, or not the sparring, but the pad work, he wouldn't finish a session with Ferdinand until he hurt him. When I first started to see that dynamic, I thought, wow, I wonder how often he does that. And I started looking at it dozens and dozens of times. If you go back and look at all the different footage you can find of Ngannou doing pad work, virtually every time the pad work has some public element to it. When it's just them in the gym with guys from the gym, it's not as pronounced. But I think, at least every time I saw it, Ngannou would hurt him. And there does seem to be this, I'm trying not to force it, but there seems to be this dynamic where the two sons grow up in a household. One reveres the father as almost a savior figure and wants to dedicate his life to honoring his father and giving him credit. And the other son, who was raised under the exact same roof, saw his father as tyrannical and manipulative and trying to control him and trying to use him. And we know, either we've experienced it ourselves in our family dynamics, or virtually everybody would have friends. You say, yeah, the parents were one way to one child, and the effect of what the parents did was 180 degrees to the other. So I'm crazy interested in seeing how that plays out as we get the heavyweight reunification match booked and then on the way. that's what I'm going to be looking at primarily, at least during the build-up. Is those two, because it was telling when DC was interviewing Gane after the fight. He says, "Tell me about the importance of your coach," or whatever, and Cyril became very emotional, not weepy, but sincere, deeply emotionally, sincerely connected to this man. He's grateful to him. When you have that much emotion and such a concentrated and limited scope of emotions connecting you to one other person, that can be an indication of a codependent relationship. I'm not saying that is what's going on. If it is, then Cyril has not figured it out yet. And there's nothing Francis could say or do that would open his eyes to it, because he truly wanted, once he realized, after DC asked him the question about the coach, he seemed to almost have relief. Like he didn't know what to do with the moment. In fact, there's a picture that I put in my notes here of him reacting to Bruce Buffer giving him his just announcing that he was the champ. Yeah, so here, is that working? Oh, okay, I can actually draw on the screen. Check that out. So those two examples there. In the first one, this one, number one, my penmanship is not great, but it's really bad the way the iPad is angled right now. I'll fix that in the future at some point. Anyway, in this one, Big Dan raises his hand, and Cyril, well, he's tight. He's not, it's almost like he's at the DMV getting his license photo taken. And in the next one, it's a very forced happiness, and they're just stills, and stills can be deceiving. But I chose those stills because they were representative of moments on the actual footage. So to me, it's interesting. It was like he didn't emotionally know what to do with the win. He wasn't just naturally happy. Even as soon as the fight was over, he didn't he didn't really react. He just kind of walked almost like an animatronic fighter, somebody who'd been programmed, and they forgot to program the emotional loop after the victory. But as soon as DC asked him the question about his coach, that's when you see this effusive. Because in the second picture, this one right here, number 2, it's a very forced smile. He's opening his mouth, and the face is making the shape, but his eyes aren't crinkled. He's not feeling it, and his body's still very rigid. And this is a dude who is so graceful and so relaxed. Like he had ice water in his veins from the first second of the fight starting. Why is he so stiff and uncomfortable here? That's what I was thinking. And it's really only now that I'm talking with you guys that are connecting it up with, as soon as Ferdinand was brought up, not only was he effusive and the real emotions poured out of him, but he immediately left the interview and went over to his coach and wanted to be physically touching him. Very interesting dynamic. I won't knock it into the ground any further than what I have, but it just sort of all coalesced for me right here. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. We'll get back to some of the rest of the fight card here in a minute. I'm gonna watch through the what's going on in the chat. Say hi to everybody. Greg Anthony, Gary Freeman, hey brother. I don't know why. I need to get a moderator or something, because YouTube thinks I don't want to see any of these questions. About a third of the questions are hidden, and then I have to show them or not show them. I put just show all the goddamn stuff, but the robot overlords say no. McFatsack, which I'm not sure if that's a boast or a lament. Did you think Lewis looked of even pre-fight? Out of even, maybe? I don't know. I really don't like looking too much into things, but my man had a different energy. Yeah, and I hear you. Even though I don't want to say pigeonholed, but even though it seems like every episode I turn out, and even starting this live stream, I just get right into stuff talking about the psychology and the body language stuff. I don't see myself as a body language person, but it does have, there are a set of tools that you can look at that can give you insights. But to me, you always have to return to things that you can kind of prove, and that's part of the reason that I've been doing this project of taking meticulous notes and watching every fight in a more structured way, because I don't want to fall into projecting my own ideas or fantasies, creating a puppet show out of other people's lives. That'd be some bullshit. But yes, Mr. McFatsack, Derek was different, and that's part of how I work through any fighter, is establishing a baseline. What are they like? See as many instances of them interacting and acting, not just in interviews. You can find personal footage of people, all of that stuff. It gives you a baseline. And you know what? We've seen Derek walk out 21, 22 times in the UFC. You get a sense. I remember when the Aldo McGregor fight happened, and in the aftermath, everybody was playing expert, body language jackass, or armchair shrink, and they were looking at Jose during the introductions and saying, "Oh, his body language was horrible. He's looking down. He wouldn't look Conor in the eye." And like every normal MMA fan who's watched Jose, most of us since the WEC days, are like, that's how he is all the time. Every time, just before he destroys somebody, he looks like the meekest dude in the world, which is exactly how he looked before the Conor fight. So with Jose, he's acting that way. It's part of his baseline. You have dozens and dozens of specific instances to look back on. Another fighter acts that way if Colby Covington comes out against Usman, and before their fight, and Buffer's doing the announcing, and Covington can't look at him, and he's static. He's not moving. He's looking at the ground. He's either about to try to pull off some Masvidal magic, some sort of trickery in the opening moments, or he's in a real bad spot. Keith says, this was a horrible matchup for Derek. Yeah, it was, but it didn't have to be. As funny that Cyril and his team, they're the ones from France, but Derek's coach is the one with the badass French mustache. So I don't know what was going on with that. Yeah, I mean, he's had it for a long time, but I'm very impressed with that thing. Anyway, he was exactly right. After the first round, he just implored Derek, you've got to go forward. We've talked about this. When you go forward, the guy runs. And I don't know what it was for Derek. He could have chased Cyril around just enough. He would have only had to land, 5, 6 leg kicks, calf kicks, and I'm talking of Derek, say round 2 he comes out and he starts chasing, even if he's trying to cut off the cage, but just follow the logic. Cyril was jumpy as a twice-kicked cat. Derek blinked too hard, and he was halfway across the cage. If Derek could have kept that up, and either that would have worn out the hair trigger reaction of Cyril so that his reactions would eventually become slower. I mean, there's actually physiological things that go on. But if every time you react to a feint, it's not really a feint, it's an actual attempt at aggression, then your whole, the limbic system, the whole system is rewarded. Your reaction was correct. So the times that Cyril just turned his back to the action and ran away, and he did that, 3 or 4 times? He did it very egregiously, I think at least 3 times. And I don't have anything against that. That's up to the ref. If it became a bit thematic and too habitual, the ref will step in. But to me, that's no different than when the shit gets thick and Tony Ferguson starts rolling into what the next universe. He's like a dolphin jumping out of the water and rolling away. You're just trying to get, particularly thinking of the Lando fight, you're just trying to get space between yourself and the bad thing happening. So I don't have a problem with that. But if Derek would have either continued pushing, so trigger this over-the-top response from Cyril, as soon as he settles down, trigger it again. Trigger it again. And Derek wouldn't have to physically actually run him down the whole time, because all he has to do is trigger him. You're using 10 calories of energy. Cyril is using, by contrast, something 500 or 700 calories, not literally, but just as a comparison. He's using 7 to 10 times more mental, physical, cardiovascular energy than what Derek would be doing. Plus, he's going backwards. And the dog that runs away to fight another day, if the other dog chases him, that first dog that's running away eventually starts to become a different thing. It starts to become the thing that is chased. It starts to become prey. And so there are all these layers beyond just the basic physiological truth and metabolic truth of making the other guy work harder than yourself. If Derek would have had just a little bit of aggression and used it pretty smart, he could have easily put himself in the fight. But he didn't do it. And I think his coach actually sort of gave up. There was no coaching. He was just trying to soothe Derek. And so to me, that's what makes it frustrating, is that there were paths to at least making the thing interesting. Because once you've got Cyril on the run, you're changing the complexity. And I don't care how intellectual or how blinkered emotion you try to blinker yourself emotionally as a judge. If you're watching a dude, particularly the guy who isn't the hometown favorite, and he's literally running, even if he just does it once or twice a round, how many strikes does that take away? So if Derek lands 15 in a round and Cyril lands 20 or 25, but he also was running 3 or 4 times a round, or even just once or twice, you start to close the gap in the scoring, in the judges' eyes. And we just saw virtually nothing from Derek. In fact, the only one who was truly entering the fray was Gane. In the sense that I have is that there was already something going on with Derek. He was predisposed to the frustration. And you didn't even see frustration because you never got mad. I think the technical term you'd want to use is he was demoralized. Derek he didn't look fully demoralized coming out to me, but there was definitely something going on. And you can see demoralization when he would lunge, he would only go 1 or 2 steps. And this is before the leg kicks had fully taken effect and taken away so much of his mobility. He would do one little lunge, and he never mocked Cyril. He didn't personally engage with him in any way, which you would expect if Derek was frustrated. But if he was already demoralized, like he'd just been watching footage for the last 3 weeks of Cyril being this amazing technician, and like, I'm not going to be able to run this fool down. So I would have to look at it more and then compare it to other fights. But my knee-jerk reaction a day after is to say that Derek came in either demoralized or predisposed to being demoralized. And as soon as, what was that, 45 seconds in, where Cyril was just tapping his lead leg, and you could tell what he was doing. He was just touching it to get the reaction. He wasn't, and to desensitize Derek to that thing, like sort of if you have if you get on the phone with a telemarketer, the thing they're trying to do is to get you to stay on the phone with them. Their ultimate goal is to sell you something. That's not the thing that they're going to present to you until they've established rapport. And rapport is really just being comfortable enough with the other person that you give them some latitude to do what they want. And that's what Cyril Gane was doing. Calls up, Derek Lewis is at home with his family. It's dinner time, the phone rings. Cyril Gane is the telemarketer. He doesn't want to come right out and say, yes, I'm interrupting your family dinner because I'm going to try to sell you some shit from the Franklin Mint. No, it's like you establish the rapport by entering their space in ways that are acceptable by community standards, by social pressures. So you call them by the first name. Oh, Derek, is that you? Well, that's how a friend or a friend of a friend would call you. So you get that social response. Yeah, this is Derek. It's like, yeah, this is whatever. And then you'd probably give your first name. Oh, this is Cyril. And he's saying it in a way like, you don't know anybody named Cyril. And he's interrupting your dinner. But he sounds like a friend of a friend introducing himself to you. So, oh, hey, man. And then he goes, you're in Houston, right? Yeah, I'm in Houston. How is the weather there? Because I'm in Florida and it's raining like crazy. So now you've got this guy answering these questions that he's got no interest in answering. But more importantly, you've sucked him into a social contract that we have in virtually every culture. Even they differ to some degree. And that's what Cyril was doing in the first 45, 90 seconds of the first round. He doesn't want to make Derek leery. He wants to ingratiate himself. He wants to say, you don't have to worry about these leg kicks, but he also wants the information. What does it look like what does the distance look like? How fast is he? And when Derek accepted those, and by the third or fourth one, I mean, what was that? It was not even 90 seconds into the fight. I knew it was over. Unless some crazy thing happened where Derek just went berserk. There was never, because Cyril essentially asked Derek to step away from his family and everything he cares about and to go on a journey with him, a stranger, somebody who actually has bad intentions, and Derek went along with it. And he gave Cyril, to follow the analogy, you're essentially giving some stranger your social security number over the phone. Because he gave all the reads that Cyril needed. It was brilliant. When I first started noticing Cyril was when he came into the UFC, and I couldn't tell. He had some signs. He seemed like a pretty sharp guy inside and outside. Now, pretty quickly you could tell he was very smart inside the cage. But, there are all kinds of guys they don't show a lot of intelligence outside. It doesn't mean that they aren't smart, like Usman. I think he is a pretty sharp guy, but he's a complete follower. He's not. He couldn't tell you if he wants ketchup or mustard. He's going to look around and see what everybody else is doing, and that doesn't have anything to. That's personality. That doesn't have anything to do with IQ. So it was really hard for me to see with Cyril. And then to see the way he fought Derek Lewis with this little touching. Even if you had a coach who was sneaky, tricky, smart enough to try to teach you that, to be able to actually go in there and flawlessly do it, he wasn't doing a technique. He was, if you're a fisherman, you can fish by the technique of casting out and reeling. And then if if a fish really grabs it, you can tell and set the line. But if you are a true angler and you're running the line across your finger before it returns to the reel, and you're feeling the line, and you can feel every little change in the way your lure or whatever is moving through the water, that level of sensitivity, that's what I saw from Cyril Gane last night. Before the fight last night, I thought, okay, most likely Cyril wins, but he's got no chance against Francis. Now, I still would give Francis the advantage at this point, but it got a lot murkier in my estimation of how this fight is going to look. To me, that's just how impressive Gane was last night. All right, go through some more of these questions here. Counterintuitive says, I remember when everyone was saying Dustin was going to lose because he was following Conor during the weigh-ins. Oops, wrong again. Yeah, well, you have to be careful. He was following Conor. People underestimated just how well Conor did in their press conference. It was crude, but he got about as much of a reaction out of Dustin as he could have hoped for. But that's all that is. It opens the door a crack. Your skills and what you follow up with, that's what's going to determine whether you win or not. And Conor just is not good enough in the cage. And mentally out, battling Dustin in public is not a difficult thing to do. He doesn't play that game. Dustin doesn't. He's a little bit like Khabib in that that's not how he interacts with the world. He wants to be sincere. But unlike Khabib, Dustin still wears his heart on his sleeve, which is, why we love the guy. Part of the reason is the guy's authentic. Think back to some of those crazy tweets he was calling out Nate Diaz. Dustin has a dark side. There's no doubt about that. I think because he's reformed himself so much, people pretend that the guy wasn't potentially a pretty horrible person and steered himself away from being that. He found things more meaningful in his life beyond just a career, but a woman, a wife, a rock to build his life on, a community. I don't know much about his private life, because he does draw the curtain with that. He's got some stuff that he'll show the public, but he draws the curtain pretty tight. But I'll pretty much guarantee you with Dustin, if you're his friend, you can rely on that guy. And the depth of friendship that he has with people, I would assume is very, very deep. So, yeah, reading into the emotion, it can give you a lot of insight. But as I've said, literally from day one of putting out videos on my channel, one, always be suspicious of anybody talking about body language. For me, I don't use body language to justify anything. When something presents itself, I then ask, it sort of asks a question, and then if I can provide another at least 2 or 3 examples, now I'm thinking, okay, there might be something here. But a single incident, somebody smirks, or a single facial gesture, even if you had established a brilliant and perfect baseline, the gestures have to be clustered, plus you have to understand the context. There's so much more into it. The actual body language part, you could literally program a computer to do that. So, like, I can't remember, one of the outlets was MMA Fighting. They hired some pudgy British guy that looked like Vince Neil, but like the very pudgiest version of Vince Neil. And this guy was one of these yahoos who, from time to time, different media outlets, they're on the same level as psychics. If your thing is the body language, to me it would be like a car mechanic who doesn't actually know how to fix a car, but he loves wrenches. And he can tell you everything about a wrench. We can't tell you what to do with it, but he can tell you where the first one was manufactured, and he's got thousands of them in his collection. He's never used one. He doesn't know anything about a car or any other application for the tool. He just fixates on the shiny object. So yes, counterintuitive. Be very suspicious of it, including me. If I go off on something, or even if I'm not, but you think I am, question anybody who's going on too much about the body language. Or is the body language simply a tool to get into the psychology, to get into creating a picture of what the context actually is? And at the end of the day, you're never getting to the point where you're going to figure out who's going to win the fight purely from that. And that's not my interest. My interest is understanding fighting on one hand, and I have all sorts of things I discipline myself to do to try to understand that. And then there's the psychological side, the human behavioral side. And sometimes they work together, sometimes they don't have anything in common. But yeah, that's my approach. I'll read a couple more here and then start taking calls. Let me call now. Gary Freeman says, I'll listen, Alpaca's crazy Jedi mind shit. But the rest of you meatballs need to leave it to the pros. Fist fight, boys. Well, thanks. But yeah. MFS says, why the hate on Francis? No hate at all. I'm not sure what you're considering hate. I did say that that he was beating the shit out of his coach and always tried to hurt him. Well, that's just true. He did do that. I think I understand some of the reasons, or at least potentially, what a few of the reasons he might be doing that. And there's no judgment from me. I'd gotten a fair number of messages from people, which I always appreciate. I try to write everybody back. I think I do. Even even in the DMs when I get, let's call them overseas Khabib fans, and overseas meaning not in North America or South America, and they're a bit unreasonable and not very complimentary to me or my mother or anybody they might associate with me. I still do write them back because I find that interesting. But I always have to come back around with people who are frustrated with me. They're either projecting their own issues on me, which we all do, or they don't get that I'm not actually judging people. So if I make a criticism of Khabib, I'm not judging him as a man. Not if we're talking about fighting. And even if we're not talking about fighting and I am trying to have a conversation about his behavior, or say Connor, who's punching old dudes in the pub, or throwing dollies through bus windows, I'll try to get at what's going on there, what it means, maybe how that behavior developed. But I'm not going to wag my finger because you guys have your own judgments. You have your own feelings about those things. Why the hell would you care if I think it's good or bad that somebody did something? And I can just tell you straight out, if you think something's over the top and bad, you should just assume I also feel the same way. But it clouds my vision if I invest my attention in all these lenses of looking at Connor as, oh, he's bad today because he hit an old guy, or oh, he's good today because he was nice to Cowboy. I think it does make me seem sympathetic to Connor when I don't fixate on the moralizing, or it makes me seem rough on Khabib when I question some of his behavior outside of the cage. Like when I point out the fact that the guy talks as much trash as any fighter that there's ever been. That's kind of shocking to people, but I've actually collected so many clips and put so much time into it. It shocked me how much bullshit the guy spews. He's Colby Covington level, but he's so much more sophisticated. That's why I've said Khabib is, I think, the best narrative builder we've ever seen in combat sports, probably sports of all time. Better than Muhammad Ali, better than anybody. And in modern times in MMA, I think it's Khabib and Adesanya, and then probably Connor. And Connor can be better in instances than either of the other two, but he can also fall way below where he is kind of now, where it's like nobody's believing his bullshit. They just assume whatever he says is manipulative and pathetic. Where Khabib, he's slow and steady. And he has controlled the media and certain segments of the fan base. Well, it sounds a little too negative to say controlled, but he presented an image that they wanted to believe, and it also happened to be a benefit to him as well. And that's what Izzy does. Izzy's way more playful with it. He's less pragmatic and more playful. But yeah, so anyway, next question. Keith says he's more of a psychology guy. That's what his paper says. Yeah, I thought you were getting yourself a degree of some sort. That's good, man. RD says, the psychology of my nuts tell my Johnson he's always hanging over them. Yeah, good point. Yeah, Gary says Derek has 21 KOs out of 25 fights. There's only one path, go forward. Yeah, yeah. You can break it down and look at it and try to make it a lot more complex, but it works on the most basic level. Go forward, Derek, and good things happen. Maybe a bad thing happens, but there's potential for all these good things to happen. Don't go forward. There's more bad things that could happen and virtually no good things. All right. Yeah, oh, Jesus. I opened the call line, but then forgot to turn my phone on. So here we go. If you want to call, go ahead and do so now. And I'm not sure how long everybody wants to go tonight, but I'll go as long as people are interested and we're having conversation. I thought there was a lot of great fights. I'd like to work through some of those as well, but I'd like a little more back and forth, so I'm trying to catch up with what everybody's writing. Lepeso says, you're right, his coach in the third literally said nothing different, same thing. Yeah, that's what I thought I was seeing. And I justified it in that the guy was, what are you going to do? You don't want to make things worse by demeaning Derek and saying, look, I've told you that you don't want to pull a James Krause or a Henry Hoof, particularly Henry with, I love the fact he had a few guys in his camp that were a little bit quitters. Anthony Johnson and the other Johnson, the lightweight. I can picture him perfectly from Tough. I remember, I can't remember his first name. I know you guys will, but that dude, that Johnson, speaking of Johnson, he was so ferocious on that Tough show, even when he stumbled and got knocked out of the competition. I still thought he was really going to put together a hell of a streak. And he has some big wins, but he's one of those guys that has a bit of a emotional trick knee. He's going along perfectly fine, and then it just gives out, and he's on his face. And Henry Hoof used to just scream from the side of the cage over the crowd, "Don't give up! Don't give up, Anthony! Don't give up! You don't have to quit!" And James Krause, right now, he's my least favorite coach. I like him as a fighter, and he seems like a pretty good guy, but from my perspective, he has zero understanding of human psychology, because you don't motivate people, certainly over the long run, you don't motivate people by micromanaging everything they do and trying to guide your fighters like it's a Sega Genesis game and you're just smashing buttons. I remember the first time Daniel Cormier was commentating on a fight where Krause had a fighter, and the guy ended up getting knocked out. But long before his fighter was in trouble, DC was like, what is up with this coach, with James Krause? He just keeps spamming all this instruction. If his fighter actually did everything he said, he'd be out of cardio in 3 minutes. So now, not only are you not helping your fighter, you're confusing them. And now, instead of trying to figure out what's going on in front of their face, they're trying to balance, how much should I be trying to listen to my coach? How much should I be shutting him out? And all of that takes mental bandwidth. In fact, in certain psychological traditions, a form of energy, intellectual energy, both conscious and unconscious, is referred to as libido. And we understand that in the sexual sense, that it's a drive, but the libido isn't really the drive. The libido is the energy to allow you to put attention into the drive. And if you think of the term more platonically, everything you're doing intellectually requires energy. If you want to call it libido, it requires some amount of bandwidth, and that doesn't come for free. Some acts are more efficient than others, just with the technical striking side of things. You can throw the big haymaker, and if it lands, you're rewarded. If it doesn't land, or even if it does land but you don't put the guy out, it's so horribly inefficient, it lowers your ability to do anything else in the fight. You're taking options off the table. And so a guy like James Krause, with his just ridiculous, the notes I made for his last fighter, I think it was during the Strickland Hall fight card, it was like James Krause is this high-pitched drone, just constant drone, like something like I don't know, 400 or 500 hertz B's or something. I guess it would be higher pitch than that, but just right in that threshold that just, yeah, really not good for his fighters. So I am taking calls. If you want to call in, that's going to be good. I'll continue to go through the chat here a little bit more and then go through some more of the fights. Okay. Yeah, talk about Colby, the real GOAT. What's funny, Colby, we don't know how good Colby is. And that's part of what I was talking about with the whole idea. If you invest your attention with your judgments before the fact, you're not going to get as much experience. And because so many people in the MMA community, even including fans, have this intense desire to judge Colby, and I get it. And if you're into social stuff, cool. But I don't mix that. When I'm serious about something, I don't mix in something that's not related. So I'm trying to watch Colby as a fighter, and then what he does outside is interesting to me, but I don't want to waste my bandwidth and my emotion on, why would anybody be invested in what the guy says something offensive? Okay, I can think what he said was wrong or insensitive or whatever, but I'm not sure why it would make me. I'm not sure why it's supposed to motivate me to behave differently, because this guy, now somebody that I say I don't respect, is controlling my behavior. That doesn't make any sense, and isn't that what Colby wants in the first place? Anyway, because Colby was so hated, everyone went out of their way, so almost everybody went out of their way in recapping his first fight with Usman to just say, oh yeah, Colby was just never in that fight. That was an amazing fight. And a moment here or there, and it could have ended completely differently. And yeah, so I'm excited to see that rematch. And to me, it's as important for Usman as it is for anybody, because Usman, in and of himself, is not a very compelling character, very compelling fighter, but he doesn't show very much personality. So having somebody to do the heavy lifting for him, kind of like Anderson Silva did with Chael Sonnen. Now, I think Anderson actually has a probably pretty interesting personality. I mean, he's got to. Some of the crazy shit he says in just weird contexts. but he wasn't comfortable expressing that in public. So he needed Chael to come along and do some of that for him. So that could be very helpful to Usman. Royal Blood asks, who has the mental edge in Colby Marty 2? Yeah. That is actually a great question. Because some of the things that Colby seems strong in mentally, he's also weak. Like, so much of his act is protective. There's certainly an aspect of what he's doing that's purely commercial. And sort of like, you can't be a little bit pregnant. You can't be a little bit of a heel. If you, like Adesanya can, because he's a real complex, interesting guy. And he doesn't become an actual heel. He becomes an anti-hero. Well, Colby's socially kind of a flunky. He's not going to create energy in people being an anti-hero. They'll never see him as that. So he just has to be a heel. And that's protective. It's also effective in some ways. It pushes people's buttons, which is pushing them off their emotional center. It's not anything more than that, but that is enough at times. And then Usman, and this is the most basic thought on these two guys. Fundamentally, Usman, there's not a lot there. He doesn't put a lot out, as I talked about. One, he's always pouting. I don't mean intentionally pouting, but just look at photos of the guy. Whenever he has an emotion, he pushes out his bottom lip, and then you see his eyebrows, his forehead kind of bunch up, like he's always confused. But he's not confused intellectually, and he's a smart guy. You see him break stuff down. He's not deficient in that area, but I think what I'm seeing is an undeveloped personality. My guess is, for whatever reason, he pushed aside personal development, personal psyche development, in favor of more necessitous behaviors, like having to achieve athletically and giving up part of who he was so he could get along socially. In that way, he and Colby are pretty similar. You can see that they're both awkward guys. Not on the surface. You got to look a little bit lower. And what does everybody say about Colby? Well, he's so fake. He's not authentic. Well, and he's not. But why is it so easy to tell? Because he doesn't have a very developed personal sense either. And the people who know both of those guys best universally say they're great guys. So with both of them, it's sort of a meeting of, well, the two biggest badasses in the division, but from a personal development standpoint, they are probably the two biggest weaklings in the division as well, maybe in the UFC. And I can look at it from one angle and say, well, Colby's weaker from that perspective mentally, and I'm framing it as individual development, understanding yourself so that you're not pushed off your center. But then there's things I see. When has Usman ever said something of his own? Pretty much everything he puts out is actually coming from his manager. And even in press conferences, every time Ali will either pull him aside beforehand, and we've even seen it where just before it's about to go on, Ali's got to go up and tell Usman what he should say. It's very interesting. And again, it has nothing to do with IQ. It's just he's not personally invested in a center within himself for everything to flow from. It's a personality type. Somebody who's You know, you got 5 of your buddies in the car. There's always going to be one dude who's going to argue all night about what channel the radio's got to be on. No, we got to go eat here. No, we're going to play darts. We're not going to go bowling. You can't make them happy. But then there's also going to be a dude, he likes doing any of it. Or if he doesn't, he's happy to be there. So it doesn't matter. We can get pizza. We can get tacos. We can do whatever. And that's, you can tell with Usman, that's the way he is. He prefers other people. And that's not a weakness. I think Colby's that way too, which is why he's indistinct. He's not separated himself sufficiently from those around him and created his own. Ironically, his ego isn't big enough. That's part of it. I think for both of them, their egos aren't big enough. Which is why when you talk to their, or hear people talk to their closest friends, they talk about how both of them are so selfless. Not surprising. So I think it's probably a toss-up. The idea of mentally weaker, I didn't go in that direction. If I think of mentally weak, I think of people who have, or a situation. Mental weakness is not a person in my way I think of it. I think of it as a moment. The weakness belongs to the moment, not to the individual, to later do some of the strongest things possible. So was it the person, or was it the moment that the person couldn't interact with properly? So for me, actual mental weakness is when you have an intention to do something, how easily are you pushed off that spot? So if that's the framework to assessing Colby and Marty as far as mental weakness, I don't think either of them are mentally weak. And that's why their fight was so damn good. You can't push them off the thing they're trying to do. Now, how creative, and that's another thing, they both follow game plans so well. Well, they kind of have to, because they don't trust them. It's not even that they don't trust themselves to improv, to improvise. It's, I believe, if I've got it correct, what sort of personality categories they're falling into, it doesn't occur to them. If you tell them the 3 steps to do, they'll push through any barrier to make those 3 steps happen. Contrast that with Anderson Silva. Chael Sonnen, what was it? Yesterday was the 10-year anniversary or 8-year anniversary of Chael Anderson 1. Anderson just wasn't going to push through any of those barriers. He wasn't going to do what it would take to get himself back up. He provided virtually no resistance once he was on the ground. And the only reason Anderson won, beyond Chael, talk about mentally weak. I'm not calling Chael mentally weak, but Chael's focus and self-image is the reason he's lost every time he's been in a big moment. And my guess is if he was really good at chess and I couldn't beat him at chess, and I do mean this personally, if you made the stage big enough, I could beat Chael at anything. I could beat Chael at wrestling if the stage was big enough and there was enough build-up. Because that's Chael. And it wouldn't be me beating Chael, it'd be Chael beating Chael. And that's what Anderson did. He used his creativity to give Chael enough time to allow him to beat himself. So Chael, again, he fits in the Marty, Colby sort of category, just in the one sense that steps to do, they're going to be wildly more successful than the average person. But if they have to figure out a bunch of things along the way that are dependent on their own personality and personal work they've done on their psyche, they're shit out of luck. Which is why you see these with all 3 of them. It's funny because I hadn't really thought of all 3 of them as fitting into a category. They do. It's not surprising that they're all wrestlers. because wrestling works that way. You don't have to be the best athlete. Now, if you also are a great athlete, it helps you out. You just have to be a tough SOB and more will, more drive, all these intangibles, all the things that Chael says he doesn't believe in, all that mental stuff that he said doesn't make any difference. Of course it does. He knows that. He doesn't want anybody, the reason he denies it is he doesn't want the rest of the world to know his secret, which my guess is he's probably also really protecting it from himself because he can't. He doesn't want to go there. That'd be my guess. One of these days, maybe I'll get to sit down with Uncle Chael, hash some of these things out, figure it out. But anyway, next question. Yeah, I think there's something wrong with my phone here. I am in a hotel, and the Wi-Fi has been weird. I don't know, maybe the Wi-Fi is messing with things. Oh, yeah. If you tried to FaceTime me, I did block that because that was throwing off the phone calls. I'm going to reset the phone. So, anyways, let me run through a few more of the fights. Just hit some of the highlights. Yeah, loved. Absolutely. Absolutely loved Jose Aldo's performance against Pedro Munoz. That was next level. And as the fight progressed, and I was sort of waiting for, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It was even Jose Aldo in his prime form at 145 had some pretty specific limitations. He did have aggression issues, meaning that there were times he wouldn't finish the show when he could have, and he did seem to get in his own way sometimes. And after the McGregor situation, it did seem like he lost a little, if you want to call it confidence. I don't know what it is, but he seemed to be, searching. I think he found what he was looking for. I think it wasn't that somehow 135 pounds was a better weight class for him. It's clearly not a better weight class for him. I think it's like the Jared Cannonier thing. If you've got to do something that's virtually impossible, go from heavyweight down to middleweight as a professional athlete and then maintain it, you have to change your lifestyle. When you change your lifestyle, that means you have to change all your habits. And, 30 to 70% of what we are is simply our habits. So you're if not completely different, a dramatically changed person. And I felt that Jose was very comfortable with himself in there. And he's a guy who clearly deals with, he still has his own demons, whatever they may be. And you can well imagine what some of them may be, knowing his background. He's always struck me as an incredibly honorable man and easy to root for. So last night when he was fighting, and I thought that was Pedro's best fight. I know he's had some nice wins, but I thought that was as good of a performance, moment by moment, against an opponent that was having one of his best performances. Yeah, I think Munoz just did really well and brought the best out of Jose, and I would be surprised if Aldo doesn't continue this run and at least get a title shot. It'll be a little tough for him if Jan still is holding the belt. But I was sort of the mindset that kind of waiting for a graceful way for Aldo to exit the sport. I hate to say that, but sometimes that's the emotional side, particularly with Jose, because he back from in his WEC days, which is where I really truly fell in love with MMA, was WEC. I didn't understand why people talked about the UFC so much more, because for every one good fight in the UFC, there was 3 or 4 good ones on a card in the WEC. And since I didn't have any friends who followed MMA, it just was easy for me. And at that time, there wasn't a whole lot of media, and I didn't even look at the media. So just kind of like a rube out in the wilderness, not knowing anything about the sport. I was just naturally drawn to the WEC. Of course, you get there, and you've got some all-time badasses. You got to put up there with Musashi and Genghis Khan and Billy the Kid, whoever else, just some world-class killers. You had Aldo and Condit, and just some just craziest bringers of violence and brutality that you could assemble. So I have a soft spot for Aldo, because that was back when I still just allowed my fandom to completely control what I watched and how I thought about the sport. So I was hoping Aldo was going to find a graceful way to get out of the sport, and he found a very graceful way to stay in the sport. It looked almost choreographed the way he fought against Munoz. And I don't mean that in any sort of negative way. You wouldn't be able to choreograph that high of a level of exchanges without it getting, monkeyed up along the way. So I don't think I'm going to get into exactly what my grades are. Like I said, I've right around 300 fights that I've graded, maybe 330, might even be more than that. I think over time I'm going to try to figure out the platform, because it's way more in depth. It's pretty ridiculous, and not everybody's going to be interested in that level of detail. But eventually I do want to bring some people along to help me shake this system out, sort of looking at fights and trying to understand fighters through that lens. Well, it looks like my phone is back up and running now. So if you want to give a call, go ahead and do so. The number is 206-276-8384. See if we can make that happen. Oh, yeah, I'm just reading. This is kind of... Right, anyway. Yeah, Marty Moose says Chael was just seconds away from beating prime Jon Jones with a broken toe. Yeah, I think about that every once in a while. Chael is such an interesting figure. And I'm not going to go off on a crazy tangent about this, but it's one of the things I've thought about. Well, just the whole thing that one of his monikers is Uncle Chael. There's no other uncles in the sport. Really isn't the kind of sport where you think of uncles. That's more of like some of the slower, more genteel sports, the baseballs or soccer, cricket might have, uncle, whatever. Even hockey, because its history is so linear and unbroken, generation to generation. You can think of like a Don Cherry, a commentator, as an uncle figure or grandfatherly figure, but don't have those in combat sports for the most part, because you wouldn't want to be part of a family that's as hard on relationships as combat sports. And I don't even mean in the cage or in the ring. I'm talking about the business side. So Chael's very interesting in that way. And I know for myself, there's just a lot you can relate to with Chael. And I love the fact that he gives some really great insight, some crazy insight. He's not afraid of embarrassing himself. It was so smart that he finally came around, and now he just fully admits how involved in PEDs he was. And I think he was playing so many games, Chael couldn't keep track of all the games he was playing. I would love to sit down. Nobody does real interviews in the MMA space. One, the media hasn't, like HBO had, was Greg Gumbel had his own show for a long time, Bob Costas, and those guys are kind of stuffed shirt blowhardy, but they got some money behind them and they could have produced and did, in some cases, really good documentary style interviews. And Ben Simmons, isn't that his name, right? Ben, the guy that had the platform for ESPN and got them into culture more. He launched their documentary series. Well, nobody is going to do that or is doing that or has ever done that with MMA. And to me, it's the best community to do it in. One, you have by far the most interesting and diversity of interesting type of people. And the thing that's interesting in one person is so wildly different from the thing that's interesting in another. And the fact that they can all be who they are and then do this really hard thing, this sport that's not really a sport. It's way too real to be. It's a sport because it's regulated as one. But it ain't a game. And then that's very true. It's not just marketing. So I would love to. That's when I can finally get some things together and put aside some of the other responsibilities I have. I definitely want to start go back to my roots, and I've mentioned this before, but do real interviews, like sit down with people, not in a studio, but documentary style. And if you've ever seen Earl Morris, not quite as ornate of a production as what he does, but a little bit of the cinema verite, but more DIY style. But you're grinding through these personal conversations, and sometimes you have to talk to somebody for 2 or 3 hours over a period of days or even at once, and then you're able to pull out all this stuff. Megan O'Leary she's not really doing that kind of work. I think she'd, snap her neck, flipping her hair if she had to sit down with somebody and ask all those questions for more than, a typical 20-minute interview. So I think sitting down, even just as I was writing somebody back about this the other day, and Chael would be great. Because you'd have to break Chael down. Because Chael will give you the authentic Chael, and when he does that, he's the realest of the real. But half the time, he does it in such a way that you're not even sure if he's giving you the straight dope or if it's still a bit of a game. So you have to be able to spar with him a little bit. there's no other way to put it. You have to be a little smarter than he is, or at least as smart as he is in some ways. And Chael's a pretty sharp guy, no doubt about it. Just raw intelligence, he's pretty sharp. That's part of what I love about him is he's also put the time in to make himself smarter than he otherwise would be if he just went along to get along, kind of a deal. He's put some personal time in making himself better, way beyond just the athletics. But you have to be able. It's like when Luke Thomas got into his little beef with Chael. Luke, God love him, and I do. I really like Luke quite a bit. I don't know him personally, but as a consumer of MMA media, I've always thought he was one of my go-to guys. Not as much anymore, even though I think his show with Brian Campbell is better than. It's more entertaining than anything he's ever done. I couldn't listen to his serious show. It was too all over the place, and listening to dudes talk about their taste in something when they don't really have very interesting taste, that's not entertaining to me. But with like Luke Thomas, who's a pretty smart guy, and it's very important to Luke that he sees himself as smart, he couldn't. Cyril Gane didn't run away as quick as Luke did it when they had their little tete-a-tete. And I can't even remember what the whole deal was. Was when Chael retired, and either Chael had said something about his own career, or just Luke had come out with a piece, trying to fill time on the air probably, and maybe didn't give Chael as much credit as he should have. And Chael, well, basically unmanned him. And like, okay, you're not going to assess me in what I did, and I'm one of the greatest to ever do this. And Chael was literally right, not necessarily. But yeah, once you get beyond the Anderson Silvas and the Jon Joneses and the handful of guys that everybody agree, is Chael better than Chad Mendes? Yeah. If you were grading everybody on the same scale, yeah, you'd have to say that. Just pure success and what he was able to do, and not all of it was in the cage, but the results, do stand on their own. And then Chael turned the whole dynamic into, okay, well, now we'll just combat each other because you're a media member, I'm a media member. Why am I so much better at being a media member than you? And you say this is all you do. That's when Luke tucked tail and turned away, and he was done. And I think Chael was completely joking. Not that what he said wasn't true. That was true. Chael is better at doing media and broadcasting than Luke Thomas is. Chael's better than me. Now, that's not something I do. It's not something I've tried to do. And certainly as far as like having and developing a personality or a style, that's I'm not going to put a ton of energy into that. How I deliver and how I do things is just kind of how it is, because all the energy goes into the content side. And I think the people that want the content, they're fine with that. But Chael is really good. To me, he's one of those dudes that I don't care what the job is, even if he's wildly unqualified to do it, if he has to do it, he'll end up becoming one of the best people at doing it, even if it means bending some rules. Perhaps especially if it means bending some rules, because that seems to, I don't know, maybe that gets him more invested in the game. But anyway, that's a strange tangent to go off on. I'm going to talk about just a couple more of these fights and then wrap it up for a late Sunday evening. It was good just to get back on the live stream getting the technology together and having the opportunity to have steady internet and all that stuff, and a place to broadcast from or stream from. But more of those opportunities should be coming online for me. Next week for sure, I'll be back in the big city and have the conveniences. So I think I'm not going to make any promises. At this point, I don't think I'm going to schedule live streams. I'm going to just do pop-up ones like today's. I scheduled it, and then I know at the time that I schedule it, if everything goes right, I'll hit the time, no problem. But I also know that I'm juggling 3 or 4 disparate things that are not connected but equally needing my attention. And if any one of those don't go perfect, then my time gets pushed off. And then on top of that, there can be technical issues or whatever else. So for the near term, I'm going to try to do as much content as possible. I'm not going to plan things. So if I put out a message, it won't be tomorrow I'm doing a live stream, or in 2 hours it'll be I'm going live now, and that will mean that I'm actually going live then, or you'll get the notification from YouTube. So if you're not a subscriber, go ahead and do that. And then I don't know, what is there, a bell, some sort of bell, you push that thing, then you're more likely to get it. Seems like you ought to just get it if you ask to get it, but anyway, that's not what the robot overlords think. So that's it's driven me crazy. Talk about being demoralized. Me not following through on obligations. It's just something that never happens in my typical life. And since I've been trying to get back to the channel over the last couple months, it seems like that's all that has happened. And part of it is that I knew it wasn't the best timing for me to put in as much, resources, mostly time, into the project. But I didn't want to let it go either, because if I wouldn't have re-engaged with people and be part of the community a little bit with you folks, I think I couldn't continue to put as much time into the back end of things, doing, I don't know if you want to call it research, but just doing, putting in all the time, the writing and assessing and all of that stuff. It's a time suck. I love doing it, but there needs to be an outlet. It needs to be for more than just myself. Other people need to be interested so that there's a give and a take and pushback. Otherwise, just some wild-eyed madman coming up with theories. Nobody's pushing back against them. It's not a healthy context to develop particularly unique ideas. It has to be, at least at some point, you have to bring it out into the light so that people can criticize it, so that people can show you. At some point, you build the boat, you got to put it in the water to see where the leaks are. So that's why I came back too soon, at least from a personal standpoint. It was too soon because I had too many obligations. I still sort of do, but I think if I'm not trying to put out a schedule, if I just do it when my intention is to do the Sunday show every Sunday, but just check your notifications and show up if you're of the mind at the time. I'd appreciate that. And yeah, here's a Matt King. Love that you're back on the regular, my good sir. Between Mighty Mouse and Rogan, is that Yeah, John Fuscani from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Mighty Mouse and Joe Rogan. Oh no, that's funny. 'Cause I love Fuscani. He's one of my favorite guitar players. No, that's Elias Theodoro, right? Yeah, and that's not fully Joe Rogan, but it's partly Joe Rogan. But yeah, that's the PERT model. It's MMA is a little sadder or a little less dynamic because Elias isn't in the mix anymore. And he was a part of a whole crew that came out of TriStar of these really non-fighters that Faraz was able to turn into successful MMA athletes. You had Nordine Talib, or Talib Nordine, to do with two first names or two last names, and Elias Theodoro, and oh geez, well even his brother, Zahabi's brother, Heyman Zahabi. Like, none of these guys are natural, dynamic athletes. You wouldn't, although some of them were very athletic from just purely a muscular standpoint, but like an average dude could probably beat any of them at basketball. They're just not that kind of a dynamic athlete. And not particularly just they had to fight. They don't, whatever it is Robbie Lawler has, they didn't have any of that. And that's not either a good or a bad thing. It's just interesting. It's almost, you get these, an island of misfits. And Faraz's ability to turn them into extremely successful MMA athletes and fighters, it boggles the mind. Yeah, it's one of the things that I've thought about, particularly because we've been seeing some pretty questionable coaching. Not so much just the cornering stuff, but just from a larger perspective. And it makes me think, well, geez, where the hell has Faraz been? You know, is he just over in Bellator now with most of his guys, or? Well, I guess probably I can answer my own question. With the state of the world over the last year and a half, Canada ain't a great place to be from, or still be, I guess, if you want to interact in the world. So maybe that's the big part of it. Certainly would stop people from using Faraz as a resource. Like Joe Duffy and just countless fighters would go up to TriStar, maybe to do a camp or start their camp or whatever. So that's probably why we haven't seen Faraz. Anyways. Yeah, Chael is made for the camera. He's a natural performer. Well, I think he loves it. And the guy, he'll tell you the truth. He makes himself so vulnerable. And it's almost incidental that he does it. And I think that's why it sort of goes unnoticed. But he's one of the few outlets, if you want to call it that, or platform. He's one of the few people, content creators, that I'm able to listen to pretty regularly. I don't get to see all of his stuff that he puts on YouTube, but I hear most of his podcasts and then some of the other stuff he does. And if you pay enough attention to the dude, he'll tell you the story of his life really accurately. It's very impressive. He has a baseline, I don't know if it's a belief or a faith or a confidence in himself, because he's also not always confident in himself, and he'll admit that too indirectly. But he does just love stories. He's one of the few guys that will authentically laugh. Matt King here in the comment section says, Chael's made for the camera. He's a natural performer. And that's right. The camera loves him. And he's got his shtick, and that's how I typically think about Chael. But he can be sincere in the middle of just the least sincere thing. He'll be running one of his gimmicks or whatever on his podcast, and then all of a sudden he starts telling a story. It's one of the things that makes me a little sad that he doesn't have a true podcast partner. Now, I think it's good that the guy that had been with him, the guy that owned the used car dealership, I don't want to talk too much about that, but it was clear that was a dangerous relationship for Chael. That was, he needed to be careful in that situation with that gentleman. And too often he didn't make for good entertainment value either. And then Chael kind of got stuck with Ariel, and that was just a stupid show. That was just so overproduced. They could have done 10 different versions of a show, and 8 of them would have been fun, but none of them were fun on ESPN. When those two guys got together, it was the worst of both people, I thought. And it's always weird when Ariel gets himself in a position where he has power over someone else, because that's when he decides he wants to bump chests and challenge the other guy. Basically, because it's so out in the open that he doesn't think the other guy's really going to push back. But then as soon as somebody does, he runs away. It's just to me, it was just a strange dynamic. So, anyway. I'm reading some here. Kiwi TV saying, notice that we bit off my games in terms of content. Now, do you mean just in the quality of what I have done, meaning the live streams, or do you mean that I haven't put out very much volume of content, or both? Definitely haven't put out the volume. And what's crazy is that of the almost 2 years that I was gone from the channel, a year and a half of it I couldn't do work. I had other stuff I had to do, but I couldn't do work in this sphere. But over the last 6 months, I've put way more time into the content than I ever did in the whole time I had the channel. Just the work that I was doing didn't develop towards episodes. And some of them would develop and then it would fall apart. And I don't put out stuff that I don't think is right. So a lot of that's happened. So it's kind of ironic. But I think, oh, okay. So somebody, thank you, Kiwi, called in getting an automated system. You know, I was having an issue in the last live stream that I'd be on the phone with somebody on the show, and then somebody else would call in, and it would just keep beeping. And so if anybody was listening to that particular show, there were some really great calls, but it was driving me crazy that it kept beeping. So I tried to turn that off. I wonder if I've done that now. Jesus. I must have turned it off somehow. I don't know that I'm going to be able to figure that out here right now. Give me 2 minutes. Put on. Maybe 1 minute.
There is some sort of a harmony. It is the harmony of overwhelming and collective murder. that I hate it. I love it. I love it very much. But I love it against my better judgment. And we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in the field.
All right. I think I figured it out. I think my phone should receive calls now. So if you want to give a call, 206-276-8384. Then we can get me on track here a little bit. Pretty easily distracted by comments. I'll go in pretty much any direction, apparently. Yeah, Kiwi says inconsistent versus when the Maymac thing was going on. Yeah, that was a particular thing, and I did put a lot of time in during that period for about before and after. I was putting in, but I was also on sabbatical, so I wasn't working. I wasn't doing anything else. So that allowed that, and it was it was a different dynamic and one topic. My attention was not diffuse in any way. Just doing the one thing, and definitely getting back to that. I don't think it'll be. Don't think it'll be too long. So. Yeah. Now that I mentioned it was lies, Matt says he can see it now. Oh, Ink. Hey, brother. Joel, that was his name. He was awesome. And I appreciated him because he could literally throw Chael off his game and piss him off. But the guy was, in my opinion, I'm just talking to a few people here, so he was unstable. He was unsafe. He seemed to be spiraling. There was enough personal information brought into the podcast by both Chael and Joel. Got a pretty clear picture of if the guy has a good day, or if the 99% of the time, probably nothing. But to me, there were just some red flags. There were boundary issues, and when certain boundary issues occur over and over again, got to be very careful. Doesn't matter, because those issues, it's not just that they transgress your boundaries. Those people transgress their own. You know, they're not able to stop themselves if the context is just right. So I was extremely worried about Chael, but I don't know anybody in the industry. There's nothing crazier than just some jackass writing you an email saying, beware of your friend, this could go sideways. I was thinking the John DuPont situation is not out of the question, but you can't raise that to somebody you don't know. Anyways, Captain says, let's talk about some shit. I hear ya. You into crypto? No, I was almost. I'm not going to tell that story tonight. I'll keep that one in my back pocket. Oh yeah, ever check out Mixed Mollywop? Gary asks. Yeah, man. I often talked about that. Not so much, I guess, in the recent live streams, but I always tried to give a lot of support to the guy. I think he's the best at what he does, by far. I think even when I was operating and getting, because there was a time when I was putting out a lot more content than what he was, because he's very deliberate, and from what I can tell, he's got a personal life as well, and not trying to make a career out of YouTube. So hit and miss when he would put stuff out, but yeah, very good. I think yeah, he's my favorite by far. I think it's absurd that actual production company hasn't snapped him up. Just to me, it tells me just how stupid the vast majority of people, of the gatekeepers, are. Really? You're gonna find somebody coming out of college and start them at some low level or mid level in your production company, and then you're going to teach them all your bad habits and all your good habits of your company, which basically means no matter how many people you bring in, you're never going to be any better or any worse than what you are right now. Or you could go in the free market of ideas, or at least what YouTube used to be, and find mixed mollywop. And even in the beginning, some of his, I don't want to criticize production because they're all just choices and we only have so much time. So, like some of his production, he would just put in long segments of video that weren't necessarily edited or anything, just sort of as context. And at first I thought, well, if so many of my videos, I put every second visually is crazy thought about. Whether it's good or bad, who knows? But literally every second is so important visually to me. And I found it freeing watching his stuff because it allows the rhythm of what he's saying to develop. It opens up space. It's not controlling. It's not a clenched fist or an overwrought muscle. It's flow. What Cyril Gane was in the fight last night. Like, that's a dude who's going to make shit happen. And to me, it's just absurd. If Showtime had any intelligence, or ESPN, what's the pay-per-view model with the writing? I was actually subscribed to it for a little while. It was a year and a half ago, 2 years ago when they first came out. I can't remember. The Athletic, is that? Yeah. That was cool. Mostly for Chuck Mendenhall. But when the platform first brought in some MMA talent, because anybody who had any talent left all the Voxes and everything. Everybody, ESPN hoovered up almost everybody, and the Athletic got the rest. And the Athletic got the better writers, and ESPN, they got everybody. They got people that weren't talented at all, and they got some that were pretty talented, and left all the other outlets with virtually nobody except for some young people that either have or haven't developed. Some of them have, most of them haven't. So that left the space open for like the Schmo, and even his lady friend there, Helen. She's got her own unique style. I'm not saying I always want to listen to a bunch of it, but I appreciate she does her thing sincerely. But those institutions, those corporations, they're not developing any talent because they're getting them all from the same sources. And how much would it cost to get Mixed Mollywop? He'd probably take, I don't know at all. Don't know the guy. I have asked him a couple times if he was interested in doing something, and he kind of is, but I think he's at least as busy as I am, and probably busier. So I still hold up hope we could do a podcast or something, an interview together. I'd love to talk to the guy. And he's another one that it's important. He values his anonymity. Mine is more like a preacher's daughter first night of away at camp. The virtue ain't sticking around long. I've never really cared about being anonymous. kind of had to for other people. But I've talked about that anyways. So yeah, mixed mollywop, definitely one of my favorites. And more than just, I think he's entertaining. I think it's cool, the Weasel, how much he's developed. That guy, he was a little awkward for a long time. He's still awkward, but he's really come into his own. He's found his own rhythm. You can be awkward. And here, look who's talking. I don't feel awkward, but I do understand a lot of people perceive me maybe more coming out awkward. People get the frequency or they don't, for the most part. And if it was in person in a bar, I can usually adapt to whatever the vibe is. But so much of doing the live stream, especially this is real casual in the future, things would be more segmented and whatnot. And I still don't know what's going on with the phone. It ain't good. It'll have to be next time. But yeah, there are people developing, and I haven't plumbed the depths with YouTube in quite a while. But the last few times I have, there's a lot of people doing cool stuff. There was a gal, and I'll not remember her name, but all she did was she would give predictions on her phone, and I still follow her on YouTube, and yeah, if somebody was trying to put together an actual roster of talent for a real platform, there are more than enough people, and people that would be dynamic. And to me, Mixed Mollywop would be the flagship. You get him, you invest in him. It's not just about giving a dude a payday. It's giving him a platform and opportunities. And now anyway, it's absurd to me the way the Voxes and the ESPNs have gone about doing it. But that's up to me, or that's not up to me. Oh, I don't know what's going on with my bit rate. It says it's no good. So maybe I've pissed off the MMA gods talking about Chael Sonnen so much. Drew Becker says the MMA holes. Yeah, those guys. Yeah, he says they're funny, especially before the newborn. I think it's better with the newborn, just because it's of all the shows on YouTube, theirs would be the last that I would say, oh yeah, they'll just bring a baby onto the set. Because half of their shows would, devolve into these dumpster fires intentionally. Yeah, just throw a baby in the mix. So I love the absurdity of that. The Schmo is my second favorite. Oh, thanks. El Captain, or Capitan, however you want to say that. Oh, Jon Jones says Weasel wrestles, does he? I didn't know that. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Well, he's a technical guy anyways, and I thought he was, especially when he was first starting out, he was so good at explaining the fundamentals of things that are so often overlooked by everybody, me, everybody. Yeah. I think pretty much I don't know does anybody not like Mixed Mollywop? That was one of the things that I thought was funny. When particularly, I had haters from the beginning. Well, I had nobody for the longest time, but as soon as I got a few subscribers, there was always a sizable chunk, and it makes sense, and people should push back, because I'm saying some crazy shit. Plus, the way I make videos, they're a little absurd. So even in the most serious moment, there's going to be a tweak. And that confuses some people. And it doesn't make them dumb that they're confused. It would confuse a dumb person, but a dumb person would actually not be as confused as somebody who's normally on the ball. Because if you're just really not that quick on the uptake, you're going to miss most of what the kind of beneath the surface stuff that I'm doing. It's the people who kind of in the, a little above average, but are used to their things being straightforward. You throw them off a little bit. They can get very uncomfortable because it's what you might call, or they might call, situationally. What's the term? Situationally inappropriate. They're expecting a certain thing, and they think they're getting it, and then that creates a bit of a bond. And then when it goes in a different direction that they're uncomfortable with, it's kind of a change. Yeah, so I understood. Plus, I was saying stuff that was, could have been nonsense. And I wasn't, a little bit different. So, but Jesus, when I started doing the McGregor and Khabib stuff, yeah, oh boy, that was fun. And I always thought, well, Jesus, why doesn't anybody dislike mixed mollywop? Because I think, if nothing else, I'm not as talented as the guy in a lot of ways, but I think I'm as sincere as he is. At least I believe I am. My content is, and he gets no pushback, and he shouldn't. But anyway, all right. This is gonna drive me crazy if this phone thing doesn't get going, because I feel like I'm stalling for time trying to fix the phone, and I'm just shucking and jiving. Does anybody know a good producer? Clearly I'm in need of one.
Quickie a good idea. Was quickies rush things.
Thank you, Jesus.
Yeah, so talk amongst yourselves. I am going to try to get this phone up and running. And if not, I don't know that I can get on track. Because I keep thinking I want to break down some. All right, I don't know. Apparently the phone. I'm too distracted to be able to figure it out. I've got a whole lot of. Well, I guess I could do this. This is a private number, so I could just listen to the messages. I mean, I could play those in lieu of actual calls. not what I was hoping for, but anyway. Well, that's frustrating. Normally I'm pretty good with technology and stuff. I know that I was going crazy because of that beeping, and my particular phone, it's not easy to deal with. So anyway, and now my internet's getting wonky. It's the Wi-Fi here at the hotel. This is a pretty decent hotel. There should be better Wi-Fi, but apparently it's not that great. So Well, anyway, it did get me off the schneid. I'm not even sure if this thing's running anymore because I'm getting a weird message. Sorry about that. I don't mean to. I ask you to go along on a journey, and I'll take you to some pretty weird places at times, especially with the video content, but I don't ever want to waste your time, bore you. You do not like what I'm talking about. Oh, yeah. What about Jon Jones and Cyril Gane? Thanks. Cap'n. Yeah. Coming into the fight, I was thinking Jon Jones was pretty much the most interested party, even more so than Ngannou, because Ngannou's just a killing machine at this point. Blood in the water, he's going to try to consume it, where Jon, for that very reason, is staying out of the water. I don't know if anybody is fooled by what's gone on with Jon, and I'm not trying to just defend my own position that I've held for years, that Jon will never go to heavyweight. Jon is never going to fight Francis Ngannou unless he loses 2 or 3 times beforehand. And then Jon might do that. But Jon has his own issues, and Ngannou fits square in the middle of the thing Jon doesn't want any part of. And I don't blame him. Jon's big mistake was, and I thought this at the time, when he was fighting Jan Blachowicz. He was going to make the same amount of money because he'd pretty much maxed out his contract, which was very good contract, and he signed it. He was happy with it, but he wasn't getting any really extra on the back end because Jon only generates a certain amount of fan interest on his own. And I think the hardcores and even fairly casual MMA fans all esteem Jon as much as they should. I don't think anybody doesn't like watching a Jon Jones fight. It just doesn't, for whatever reason, resonate with the masses. And so Jon is thinking, I've done nothing but fight killers my entire career. And I'm making a little more money, a little more money, a little more money, and then I lose my rivalry with Cormier because I beat him twice. And then he goes on and makes even more money fighting Stipe at heavyweight. And he's got he leaves me behind. So Jon is fighting Santoses of the world and Dominic Reyes, and these are all good, solid guys, but zero name recognition. Not going to put one more pay-per-view in Jon's back pocket. And I mentioned being demoralized and talking about Lewis earlier. Anybody would be demoralized if you were in a high-risk occupation and you found yourself in a rut where the risks were as high or higher than they've ever been, but the rewards across the board were static or depreciating. Because I think even just the social aspect of it, Jon doesn't get as much out of it as he used to. He used to get a kick, I think, out of being the center of attention for limited amounts of time. Jon, for as much as everybody wants to call him a narcissist, he's not in the broadest sense. Or I guess in the broadest sense, you could put him in the category, but it's not his defining characteristic. Jon is a sensualist more than he's a narcissist, and those are they can be combined in a personality, but oftentimes you see them oppositionally, and I think you do see that with Jon. But anyway, massive rut, and when he came in, he was doing nothing but fighting legends, beating legends, and beating them in a way that nobody had ever beat those legends. Quite honestly, I think Khabib was the last straw for Jon. The whole Khabib as GOAT, I mean, Jon Jones has fought how many times? Jon fought more main events in a year than Khabib fought in his whole career, or close to it. I mean, to me, the biggest issue with Khabib is we don't know how good he is because he didn't challenge himself. He left before his prime. He didn't leave in the middle of his prime. He left before his prime, and he never fought a wrestler. He never fought a rematch. There's just all kinds of things. I'm trying to think in my mind now. Khabib only was on the main card, I think, of six main cards. Or is it 5? Jon Jones had more. He had risked more before he won a championship than Khabib did in his whole career. And I think that was the last straw for Jon. And those are just, we can quibble about what it means, but all those things are just true. And I think, because Jon has, over the last couple of years, I think a lot of people have noticed, like, he would take Conor's side in anything. And at first I thought, well, that's, in the common parlance, that's, what do they say? Game, recognizing game. Jon wants to think of himself in the same genre as, or the same category as a Conor, sort of transcendent to the sport. But I think it has more to do with, he had a lot of resentment with Khabib. And, Chael points it out all the time. Yeah, Jon has all the records or has all these successes, but that doesn't mean that he also is going to sell out stadiums. Well, Khabib didn't sell out stadiums. Khabib couldn't sell a pay-per-view without Conor. But Khabib, as I've talked about many times, he could control narrative so well, and he understood his lane. He knew what he was doing for the UFC, and he made them accountable to that purpose. He helped so much in developing, that entire region of, the Russian satellite nations there. All the, can't remember the term for those countries right now. Anyways, all the stands totally open that up. You're not going to take your product there. They don't have $7 between them. But you get your product from there. You get your athletes from there. What's ironic is you think Dagestan and pretty much that whole region, or even Russia in general, and you think, well, wrestling. Well, yeah, and they can all wrestle. But except for Khabib, they can all strike, too. It's crazy. And Khabib opened all that up, that whole pipeline. And he literally put a pipeline together and his own team together to funnel it through his manager, and then funnel the talent into the various organizations. Very impressive. A lot of... Conor gets credit for his business sense. And, I think Conor deserves some credit for some of the things he's done. He certainly has had success, but what Khabib did, he's doing this. He's boots on the ground, making things happen. And the UFC also needed Khabib to get lucrative contracts in Abu Dhabi and around the Middle East. And, Khabib took full advantage of that. Jon had all kinds of positions in his career where he could have taken advantage, where he could have, and I mean that in the proper sense, that he had these opportunities because of successes he had helped create for the UFC, but Jon, for the most part, didn't do the extra work, didn't want to take advantage. He didn't come up with ideas, and then he got himself into trouble so often, most of those opportunities went away. But I'm still sympathetic. I mean, that is just what it is. I'm still sympathetic that Jon is sitting there like, I can't believe I'm as good as I am. I've actually never been beaten, and my record isn't padded like Khabib's. And everybody's saying Khabib's a better fighter than I am. There's no, and there's all kinds of arguments. If you want to talk about Jon or GSP or Anderson or even Fedor, and you can go back and forth. Khabib is very good, but he is the next tier down. He's not in that top conversation. People have that opinion, but they don't ever have an argument for why he deserves to be there. And it's cool if you're a fan and you just have that opinion. My heart, I put Carlos Condit in the GOAT talk. That's my honest feelings. The reason I wouldn't make an episode out of it is I can't do the work to show the results. I can't prove the math with Carlos. I can prove the math to put him in the top 50 fighters of all time, maybe top 20, especially if you're talking about non-title holders. And he had an interim, but non-full title holders. Yeah, he's in the top 5 of that for sure. So Jon is sitting back thinking, Daniel is making more money than me. And now Khabib, I don't know if Khabib makes more money, but Khabib's getting more out of the UFC than Jon's getting. And I think it's very frustrating, and that frustration made him leave the weight class that he could have continued to dominate and put himself in the position where now he has nothing. He can't come back. Now, I do believe that Jon was sitting back desperately praying Derek Lewis would win, because that's a fight Jon would throw himself in front of tomorrow afternoon, because DC already beat him. He doesn't have to be afraid. He's got the blueprint in his back pocket. He can use his wrestling, and he already beat DC, so surely he could beat Derek. But Ciryl Gane, what's he going to do with him? Ciryl actually combines a lot of the problems that Jon had with Dominic Reyes and Santos. Why am I not getting his first name? But you know what I'm talking about, the goddamn big hammer on his chest. Anyway, little bit of the Brazilian, Santos rather, with his athleticism and real power, but then some of the more tricky, not that Dominic Reyes is as technical as Ciryl Gane is, but he is in some of, just ask Chris Weidman, he can be tricky in moments. He can be very technical and proficient in moments and is able to deliver real nice power, particularly in close. Well, put both of those guys together and turn it up to 11, and now you're approximating, or at least getting into the neighborhood of what Ciryl Gane can do, plus a legitimate frame for the division. So I think Jon might think about Ciryl, at least as it relates to if he was going to fight Gane or if he was going to fight Ngannou. There's no question there. He's never going to fight Ngannou. So I think Jon now and he kind of shot his shot with hiring a manager or whatever that gentleman was doing for him, a lawyer. That situation reminded me at the time, and now even more so, when the dude who had been associated with the baseball players union, he came in all hot and heavy, and then there was another group, the one that GSP and a few others got involved with. Like, everybody thinks they're going to cut a fat hog moving from their expertise in the business world into MMA because, oh, they've just noticed it. But then they show up and realize, oh, this is shark-infested waters, and it's really difficult. There's a reason there's so few companies that can put on, well, there's only one company that puts on regular, high-level competition and meritocratic-based competition for the most part. 99%, all the fights, we can quibble whether Derek and Gane should have been fighting for an interim title or not, but you're missing the point. If you're caught up in that, you can have any opinion you want. I think most of the opinions can be debated, but if you think the UFC is somehow illegitimate because they made that move, then you couldn't possibly ever watch a Bellator event. You'd have to hate everything else in MMA so much more that you'd just be a miserable bastard. And that doesn't mean that you can't hold the UFC to task or you can't keep your eye on them. I think we all need to do that very seriously, because we don't want to lose. We don't want to lose what we have, and I do believe we're absolutely in a golden age of MMA, and it's an iceberg. We see the tip of it, and those are the performances, like Robert Whittaker against Gastelum, or Max Holloway against Kelvin Kattar. Those kinds of performances, or quite honestly, Fiziev versus Green last night. And even just the singular performance of Gane. We're seeing that, and those types of performances on a regular basis is so unusual. But my thesis of this being a golden era for MMA, the performances are just the tip of the iceberg. It's all the business and the structure. I was just complaining that the institutions and media, the gatekeepers, if they say they want to produce better, more original, more gripping content, then why aren't they why are they just recycling the same old recycled talent or creators? If Luke Thomas leaves this place, he's just going to go to the other place, and Ariel goes, how do you go from ESPN back to Vox? That doesn't make any sense. And none of these guys have the wherewithal to do what everybody on YouTube does, which is do it for yourself. If this was my business, if I had tried to do a business with what I'm doing, or anybody, Mick Smallywop, if he was trying to make that his business, he would make more money creating his own platform than any of those guys. Maybe Ariel at his place, but he's the only one. And Ariel would make more money if he built his own thing as well, but they don't want to. They hold on to some vestige. Well, the UFC is that way as well, but they're the opposite. Everybody else has this, the Scott Coker model, which is basically the boxing model, where you want a sure thing. It's wrestling. It's the WWF or WWE, whatever they are. You want the sure thing. And I think early on in Zuffa, that's what they were trying to do. They did want that. But they hit the wall of reality that you can't predict who's going to win. And you can't not even through corruption can you guarantee winners like you can in boxing. Mixed martial arts is, one, not everybody's going to go along with the game. You think Khabib would have gone along with the game? Even if they promised him a bunch of stuff. Now, they could have kept him out the way boxing keeps certain dangerous people out, but that's pretty rare. But boxing is such a limited skill set, limited in scope, not in depth. The people self-select out of it. So only a certain kind of person is just like a very limited number of people are going to select into being world-class ballerinas. A lot more ladies are going to just dance down at the club with the pole. And I don't know which one makes more. Probably ladies that just, like Floyd Mayweather's club, they probably make more than ballerinas. I don't know which ones makes you more famous. I don't know. But when you make the skill set and the requirements and the whole ethos so self-contained, very few people, if you think about it as a pipeline, you make it very small gauge, very small pipe, not much can get through there. Now, it's a great way, especially if you want a closed system, say to keep impurities out. You don't want any extra air in there. You want it to be sealed tight. And that's how boxing works. You don't have riffraff coming in. You don't have disruptors. Anybody who might disrupt, they get incorporated. Well, that's not how it works in the UFC. And you have all kinds of disruptors. They've built their model on sort of searching, allowing disruptors to, the way sensors look for neutrinos flying through the universe. You just set them up and the neutrino either hits it or it doesn't. You can't predict where they're going to be, and there's no way to sort of shepherd them into an area of collection. And that's how outliers work. The opposite of sheep. You're never going to get them all together. And the UFC's business model, for all the squirrely things that they do, the one truly great thing, and I think it's why we actually all love MMA, and particularly the product that the UFC has been putting out, particularly over the last few years, is that they bring in all these outliers. Even from one gym, we talked about it at the beginning of the live stream, Cyril Gane and Francis Ngannou. They came through the same gym. They were stamped in MMA by the same hand in Ferdinand Lopez. And yet they couldn't be more different. Fight style, mentality, all the superficial stuff. And that's amazing. You don't get that in any other sport. And those guys should be as similar as they could be, and yet they're not at all. That doesn't even take into the difference between name any other two fighters. It's why you don't have dynamic superstars. How different is the second or third most popular player in basketball to LeBron James? You know, if you take a few steps back, they're virtually indistinguishable. They have the same stories. They have the same sort of press releases. And that's not to criticize. It's the part of the problem is that the system that they're within is so regimented and so streamlined, it just makes them so cookie cutter. So even their athleticism isn't able to flourish as well as it could. I know that from a technical standpoint, or from a strategic standpoint, the game has changed and that there's more three-pointers now. But what has LeBron done to change the way the game is played? And I wouldn't get into that argument because I just have a cursory understanding of contemporary basketball. But nothing like the impact that dozens of fighters have had in MMA in the last couple of years. And part of that is the sport of MMA isn't as old as basketball. But in some ways, it's actually a lot older. Because people have been fighting way longer than James Naismith decided to put a sport together for slow boys and girls. You know, that's what the game was invented for. At the Y. To entertain the ones that weren't good at actual sports. Now it's developed into something way more dynamic because disruptors came into the game. That's what allowed basketball to go from maybe the fourth, probably more like the sixth most popular sport in America in the 70s even, to being, you know, a couple years ago, the second, third most popular sport, probably just behind football. But as far as cultural impact, the UFC has way more impact in a disruptive way than basketball. But, you know, basketball is completely corporate at this point. So it's difficult to be dynamic when every T has to be crossed and every I jotted. That's not a criticism of the players. You know, I think the players, if you put LeBron back in the day when there were better teams and there were better coaches, I think he would have developed better. He probably still would have been one of the greatest ever. But I guarantee you bring back one of the great teams from the 80s or early mid-90s, Bulls team, even the Pistons from 88, you know, they beat the hell out of anything that's won a championship over the last 15 years. And you can say the same thing about football. And what had been my favorite sport, hockey, is even worse. And all for similar reasons. And it's not a conspiracy. Nobody's trying to make things worse. So you try to make things better and safer and more predictable. Well, that's the McDonald's model. And up to a certain point, that's great because it gives you convenience and it gives you predictability. And that's rewarded in the marketplace. But then that becomes its own goal. And now all of a sudden you're a dog chasing your own tail. And you don't allow any outside influence. And so there isn't, of the major, I don't know about soccer, but of the major North American sports, there's not a hockey team that's won a cup in the last 10 years that could hold a candle to the great Red Wings teams of the 90s, early aughts, or the Penguins teams of the late 80s, early 90s. Go back to the 50s with the Red Wings, Montreal. Once you get past the technical differences in sports products, like the skates are better and the ice is better, once that is evened out, the teams were just so much better. You think anybody's beating the Steelers from the 70s or the 49ers from the 80s? Teams are different because they're so much more regimented and there's very little originality. There can be no disruption. So that'll eventually happen to the UFC, not while Dana White's there, which is one of the reasons, one of the things that mitigates my sense of outrage when Dana does squirrely shit. And he does more good things than bad things in general, but I couldn't be any happier with the place the sport is at. Yeah, I'd like everybody to make more money. But there are people doing well. Some people could be doing better. And I've yet to see anything functional put forward that would improve pay scale in any real way. Like actually shown that it would. That's just a blank statement. I've never seen anybody present that. They say, well, if you just get a union, then you'll make more money because look at baseball. Well, that's not how the world works. If you're talking about unions, okay, look at teachers. They don't make a lot of money, and nobody's more unionized than they are. Nobody has crappier work conditions than they have worse. You know, there are plenty of teachers who actually have more dangerous work situation than UFC fighters. So, okay, yeah, you pick the very best example of a union working, but you can find more examples where they don't work, and that's not me making an argument whether unions work or don't work. They can, for sure. But nothing is as simple as that. So I would hate for us to, as the amount of influence we can exert as fans and as commenters or whatever, to be judicious in how we seek to improve the things we're passionate about, and don't be too confident that we know exactly the best ways to make those improvements, especially when it involves a certain number of people being pushed out. So that's kind of a weird little soapbox I got on there for a second. I didn't think I was doing that, but at the end it kind of felt that way. I'll answer a few more questions here, and then I'm going to wrap it up. I appreciate everybody coming out tonight. Oh, come on now. Absolute MMA. Cyril Gane will own Francis. Think about that a little bit. Explain to me. See, got to get the phone working. Next time we get together, I'll have the phone. Because I want to know. I don't know. As I said earlier in the show, I thought I had a pretty good feel for how the fight might work. But now, after last night's performance, Cyril's in a different... I know a lot less about him, even though I learned so much, or feel like we got to learn a lot about the dude. Got a lot more information and no less. But I don't know what, he's going to stay on the outside and Francis is going to just let him? How's that ever worked out for anybody? Was Cyril going to have a wrestling heavy... He can't fight the way he fought against Derek, because he put himself in danger a lot with Derek. So looking and thinking that Cyril created a blueprint for fighting a heavy puncher, that MMA math, I don't see how that works at all. You get into the space with Francis, he's not going to walk into the cage with predisposed to being demoralized. If Francis has a bad fight, it won't be against Cyril Gane. Everything that is, he might try so hard because the stakes are so high, meaning Francis, but there's no way he's going to underperform because he's hesitant. He might overperform or try to do that, and then that could spell disaster for him. But yeah, it's very preliminary. I have to do way more thinking to get anywhere close to something that seems like likely to happen in that fight. But my first thought is that Francis should have most of the advantages, and it's going to be up to, if you think about it in terms of a physical land battle, Francis has all the high ground at this point. He's got the power. He's got the power physically. He's got it also with the promotion. He's got the name power. So he's got the power. He's his style, if you get close enough to slap him, if you're getting close enough to slap him with your feet, the amount of good you're going to take away from that experience is not going to outweigh the amount of danger you're putting yourself in. Derek couldn't figure out how to break down the distance. Well, we've not seen Ngannou have a problem with distance before. I mean, remind me if I'm missing something, but seriously, I don't... His understanding of timing and distance has gotten way better. for sure, earlier in his career, he had wasn't so much the timing and distance that was a problem as being able to control his urge to unleash, which is very typical across the board in most sports. Being able to temper your enthusiasm is one of the first major obstacles for great performers to overcome, even in music, any of the real arts. That's an issue as well. Sort of, you have to get out of your own way before you can do anything else. And I think Gane was, we certainly made strides doing that. And so when Ngannou doesn't have to chase him. So what we saw with Derek, don't think that that's what you're going to need to see, but Francis will somehow be better at chasing him down. Francis can just stand there. What if he just stands there? Run this mental experiment. Well, Cyril is eventually going to come into distance to try to land some leg kicks or something, right? When he's that close, now you can start to work a game plan if you're Francis. Or Francis can move forward. Well, if you're going to stay close enough to counter Francis, meaning Gane, if you can counter him, he's close enough to do damage to you. You're not going to be able to use techniques and strategy against Francis that you could use against Derek. There were times you could touch him and he couldn't touch you. And that didn't have to do with reach. That had to do with, well, from a ground level, from a philosophic understanding of how the sport works. Derek has a narrow focus. He really understands a lot, sincerely, about what he's focused on. It's really hard to knock dudes out just using explosion and not even timing in the sense of predictive timing, which is more technical and more what I'm talking about with Cyril and Ngannou. With Derek, it's reactive timing. And he's as good as anybody with that. The problem is you can trick reactive timing. And the very best counterpunchers, like Adesanya, he utilizes both, reactive and predictive. Most of his head movement is intentional. It's not reactive. That's why when Adesanya gets tripped up, and one of the things I noticed pretty early in his rise is, like, everybody had success on the feet with him, at least for a little while, where the truly great reactive strikers, that doesn't happen until they start to get tired. Like Conor, Dustin, never had any success with him until Conor got tired or, took him down. But that's another way to get him tired. The dude we just saw, I'm trying to remember his name, there we go. Fiziev. That dude, I think he has the best reactive head movement I've ever seen. I knew that they were already talking about him in terms of the Matrix, but it was outlandish. And the fight stats were way off in that fight. They overinflated Bobby Green's numbers crazy. And I appreciate what Bobby was able to do. And he's actually one of my favorite dudes to watch. But anyways, I'm talking about this reactive, being able to use a reactive evasion rather than a predictive one that's built into technique and strategy and timing and setups and all that stuff. And Derek doesn't have any of the other kind. He only has the reactive counters. That's what he's always doing. And so he just got tricked. He was close enough to hit Gane all the time. And Ngannou has both. He's very fast. He's not quite as fast with the reactive as Derek is, but Derek's one of the best with that. But he has this other with the predictive. He is starting to set traps, and he's gotten so much better. To me, the Stipe fight, the second one, is a nice indication of just how much more technical, both understanding and application, has gone on with Francis. Because he was already the second, third best heavyweight in the world. Even when people lost faith in him, he still was incredible. He still was going to beat 9 out of 10 dudes. He wasn't going to go on some crazy losing streak. And he's under Eric Nixick. That's working out great. Francis he was already a rocket, or I guess he was already a nuclear payload. He had the power. He had the physicality, and Eric Nixick built a rocket for him to deliver the devastation, all the traps. And when you learn to do it offensively, and you're a smart guy like Francis is, a self-determined guy, I just love his backstory because it's all about everybody else around him had given up and given in, and he just couldn't. And his life would have been easier in the short term. Every day his life would have been easier if he would have given up like everybody he knew, and he didn't. You think he's going to, and I'm not saying this is just rhetorical, who thinks he's going to give up against Cyril Gane at some point or give in? Ain't going to happen. Now, Gane is going to bring all kinds of new challenges. He absolutely could win. And it's very exciting to me because if he does beat Francis, it means he's going to have to dismantle all the booby traps and landmines and nuclear warheads that are now heat-seeking. He's going to have to undermine all the things that Francis does well, plus be able to bring something that can actually damage the guy. Even when he was stone cold, dead, tired in the first fight against Stipe, Stipe couldn't put him away, and Francis proved to be too dangerous. Even in that 4th and 5th round, he could barely hold up his body. He was swaying under his own fatigue, and yet he still stung Stipe enough that you finally just see that, oh, this, I'm not, I'm going to keep my distance, kind of like a shepherd dog. Just going to keep the danger over in this section. Just keep it contained and ride out the clock. Very smart. And Francis has improved in all those ways. So if Cyril does, not only if he wins, but if he presents a legitimate threat, if it's a back and forth, like I can't imagine what would a back and forth fight look like with Francis. We've never seen it. Because back and forth means I hit you, you hit me. And perhaps you and I could have a back and forth fight. And afterwards, lick our wounds and have a beer. But Francis doesn't have back and forth fights. You can hit him, and you can continue to do that over a period of time. But he can't hit you repeatedly over a period of time because you're no longer in the fight. He just has that queer power. Completely. It's not just the power, truly. It is the ability to deliver it, and it's only gotten better over time. So I want to thank Gary Freeman for donating $5, Mr. Inc. for donating $5. Thanks, brother. Hey, there's Earl. Showed up. What's up? Just been rambling, kind of crazy. Don't know why exactly it happened that way. I think it's because I brought in a bunch of new technologies and everything was... Because I've got all these notes I was going to go through, and it kind of got away from me, and the connection's been a little bit squirrely, so kind of in and out, and the phones don't work. So I don't know about that. I'll tell you what I will do, though. I'm wrapping it up here right now, but as I had said earlier, I'm not going to do a whole bunch of planning for the next couple weeks, month or so. I'm going to just try to do live streams as much as I can. I'll try to do one a week. I'll try to do one every Sunday. Just have to subscribe to the channel and get the notification when I put it out, and I'll put out a couple things on the Twitter right before it goes live. And then we can kind of all just be in this together, and then there's not the weird expectation of me saying I'm going to show up and do this, and then you're making a commitment to be there. Right now it's when I can do it, I do it, and if you can show up, that's great. That makes me happy, and hopefully you get something out of it. And then, say by fall, my other obligations should be more in order, so I should be able to give a more professional approach to doing the thing. And the next stage is getting out episodes. It's been difficult wrangling Cavassier. He's not an easy dude to get a hold of. So, I've done my part of the work. He's yet to show up for his part, if I'm being honest. So, I'd like to think I'll figure him out and get him here. So, once I reconnect with him, once Cavassier's on board with it, it won't be a problem getting out an episode or two a week. Because I've certainly got the scripts and the work done on the back end for a whole bunch to come. But I appreciate everybody showing up. It has been fun. It's kind of a weird, interesting one. Some good questions. Thrown off a little bit by the phone not working. Anyway, I will have that fixed by next time. Santa, with 2 S's, says, do you think Gane could utilize a game plan to beat up Francis's legs and using techniques such as leaping side kicks to the knee, like Till or Bobby Knuckles? Yeah. That, and he certainly showed the ability to pull that off very efficiently against Lewis. And particularly if he can compromise the leg or the knee of Ngannou early on, that would be huge. Makes me... Now, of course, any of those techniques, the jumping in, you don't want to get timed, but and I guess that is my premise, that if you work the game plan properly against Derek Lewis, you're really not in danger. And we've seen that across the board. There's a lot of guys where he just never got off the schneid. Even Volkov destroyed him. Not like beat the hell out of him, but points-wise, he beat the brakes off him until the very end. But Daniel Cormier, and now we've seen Cyril Gane and Mark Hunt, there's all kinds of instances of a good game plan and a technical approach and a diverse one just completely taking the danger out of fighting Derek Lewis. We've never seen that work against Ngannou. He's a wildly different kind of fighter. I think it's easy to fall into a trap of thinking Ngannou has power, Derek Lewis has power, and when they fought each other, the power kind of nullified each other. And I know for myself, I've really had to push all that time period out of my mind so it doesn't clutter things up. After I've worked through an issue, I can then go back and consider what had been pushed out. But I think when analyzing the Ngannou fight or any of his fights, you can't think about the Derek Lewis fight. That just isn't something that correlates to anything else in his career. So yeah, you'd have to use a lot of different techniques, and probably guys was it Jack Slack or maybe the Weasel, guys who are really hip to the specifics of 75 different ways to cut an angle. There are probably some very sophisticated or complicated, most importantly, effective ways to undermine the traps that Francis is going to try to set, and also be able to get in and get out. Because it can't purely be athletic. It's going to have to, you're going to have to build it up layer after layer. Even though Gane is very athletic, that's rolling dice. You go in for the leg kick without setting it up properly too many times, and you're going to get caught. And you're not going to frustrate Francis. I'm a dog with the bone when it comes to Francis's psyche. People try to put him in a category that I completely reject. They never give evidence. They're completely reductionistic. It's ridiculous. He lost to the greatest heavyweight of his generation in Stipe. And then there was sort of a non-fight with Derek Lewis. And 2/3 of the brains in the MMA space completely threw the dude under the bus and never even wanted him. Even when he finally got his rematch with Stipe, they didn't think he deserved it. Like he had somehow tainted himself by losing 2 fights. I never understood that. And, I looked pretty deeply into Francis's psyche, and I will absolutely put out an episode about the mentality of Francis Ngannou, because I've put in a tremendous amount of time and enjoyed all of it. And I'd been waiting for the right time to finally put it out. And probably when the fight's announced between the two, I'll probably put it out right after that, like long before the fight, so then kind of get it out there and people can poke holes in it if they want to. But Francis is a pretty complicated guy, not weirdly complicated, not unnecessarily complicated, like not self-involved, making problems for himself kind of an issue. But it's not as easy as just looking at one factor and thinking about him. I talked about a little bit earlier that he could be such a complete jackass to his coach, and I compiled a fair amount of footage of Francis hurting people unnecessarily, and not all fighters. Like he hurt a cameraman at the UFC, and physically intimidates guys. He's very interesting. Yeah, and then at the same time, he's in like pure joy. You see some of the footage, like there's a little kid playing on a trail he's walking by, and he takes time, and like he's really into it. This giant man and a tiny little kid, and he's just so gentle. And to have all that complex, well, he's a true example of man. He's a true example. He's the complete specimen. And I think because so many people fixated on his physicality early on, it became shorthand. It's like, oh, he's a monster. How many times did we just hear that repeated? And when you have a limited talent pool, as we do at times in the MMA space, the talent I'm speaking of, or lack thereof, being those who report on the news, not the fans. That was always my premise. My thesis was, why is the media so stupid and all of their sections for community so dopey, when I can tell that MMA fans are at least as smart as any other sports fans, and I have the suspicion they're more curious and more interested than looking outside, coloring outside the lines a little bit than your average sports fan. So, yeah, Francis is an interesting dude. And he won't be undermined by the mental stuff. But everything I've seen from Cyril, I had a lot of different questions. And I kind of have more now after that fight. But he's very solid mentally. Now, it might his mental stability might be pinned on something that isn't stable. Like, he might have an unhealthy relationship with his coach. It might be too codependent, because there seems to be something going on there. But that's me stretching. That's me looking for something, like you would have to do with both of these fighters. They don't have obvious weaknesses. To me, that makes it exciting. And there's a lot of great fights coming up. Now that Colby Usman's on the books, it's a good time. And I think something's got to happen with Jon Jones, even if it's wrong. So. What do you think of the UFC? Dana's strong arming of Francis. Wouldn't you think Francis is a guy you would want to work with on the basis of his marketability? Yeah, that's another complex situation. Even Francis, and that's another thing that I kind of took pains to sort of prove if that was true or not true, and to myself, trying to zero in on the guy's psyche. Yeah, he got out over his skis. He lost his coach. He lost all of his close friends. He was flying to France a week before the fight to party. He thought showing up was going to be a coronation. He didn't realize it was going to be a fight. I think there's some pretty basic reasons he assumed Stipe was not going to be a problem. And it shattered what he thought was true about himself in some ways. And that's what actually caused him to have confidence issues in the next fight with Derek Lewis, because he wasn't sure who he was anymore, because everything that he had built this amazing life on, being the 1 in 100,000 or 1 in a million, not just the success in the UFC, but just getting to France. That was as unlikely a journey, a more unlikely journey than once he got there to get to the UFC. So, if all the tools you use to do this amazing thing now all of a sudden don't work against this one dude, what do you do? And well, like I said, he'd gotten out over his skis, and I think he has that. He's got a bit of a diva in him. He's got an edge to him. You can't send people to the land of Nod the way he does, with alacrity, and not have a dark side. He's got a very dark side. And all of the greatest heroes become heroes because they don't just control or contain their dark side. They utilize it. They do something good with it. And that's what Francis is doing. But a little gets out under the door sometimes. So I'm a little hesitant to just assume that Dana White, for no apparent reason, is screwing himself over so he can screw Francis over too. My guess is that there are several things going on. Some of it Francis is doing, some of it Dana being a bullheaded SOB. And it might be because there was an issue before that Dana's very hesitant to give in to anything. That'd be my guess. Because that scenario doesn't require anybody to be a maniac or to be self-defeating. You just follow your own self-interest without going too far out of bounds, and you run into that situation. Like, Dana is okay. 3 months we've been trying to book a fight. We've needed somebody. You said you could do it, and then you said you couldn't do it. So if that happened, then it makes sense, because when would you cut that time off? I mean, was he really going to fight? If he said he was going to fight in September or August, maybe. But maybe he said he was going to do that previously and didn't. And maybe you're just feeling burned because several years ago, when you put so much into him, it almost all went to shit because he got out over his skis. I mean, to me, one of the good signs is that they're both overreacting to some degree. And that only happens in relationships where both people care and are engaged in the process. You don't ever want to be in a relationship where you don't fight. Ever. You know, certainly don't ever want it getting out of hand, and you don't want it to be asymmetrical. Argumentation where one is just always nagging or demeaning and the other's just taking it. But disagreements and being upset with each other and questioning each other's reasons for doing things, that should be the beginning. It's an uncomfortable state, but then that's the beginning of a process of reaffirming the commitment. Because you think, well, why didn't you call me back when you said you were going to? And God knows why. And maybe the first answer your spouse gives you is a lie, but it's a lie for a stupid reason. And now you've caught him in a lie. And if you can't come back with any sort of a good faith attempt to reestablish what you both understand to be true, well, then you're both screwed. And it happens that way in business contexts as well, particularly when it's done more with a handshake than with the contract. And part of what we love about the UFC is that it's less bureaucratic and corporate and more man-to-man. That also makes it messy at times, but none of us would be here if it wasn't for people making messes. Even on every level, that's true. So I sort of have a wait and see attitude. I'm not looking to assign blame to either party at this. It didn't hurt Francis. I didn't understand people thinking, okay, how does it hurt Francis? The fight's bigger now. He was going to have to fight both of those guys. Now he only has to fight one of them. So that's good. I mean, that's how certain champions have run their careers, by putting themselves and playing games with their scheduling. Lots of champs have done that to avoid certain matchups, or at least avoid needing to fight two of the very best. You get them to fight each other. So that happened for Francis. That was good. He's not going to make any less money. In fact, he'll make more money than if he would have just fought. If instead of it being Derek Lewis versus Cyril Gane, it would have been Ngannou versus Gane last night. That would have made less money than what that fight will make in the future. At the very least, it'll make the same. So I don't understand, unless somebody is building a case more generally against Dana, which is fine. I think it's actually pretty easy to do. Unless somebody's doing that, I don't see how it hurt. Did it hurt his legacy? I guess if you really stretch it, I could say maybe Ngannou, his status was hurt a little bit, like they're questioning. But you really have to stretch, and I've heard people sort of make that argument that he was dissed or whatever, but don't explain how he was dissed. They just say he was. So I would need that explained to me. All right. Is there a weird fight going on here in the chat? I leave you bastards alone for 7 minutes to talk some nonsense. And, okay. I think you guys worked it out. Good. Yeah, an enigma wrapped in a paradox. All right. Anyways, you guys need to. I'm sure you are taking care of yourselves in there, because I'm not an overlord. So I'm not even saying what kind of behavior anybody should have. Just be yourselves and try not to get butthurt over things you don't need to get butthurt over. That's my. That's how I try to be. I try to be less butthurt about stuff than I was when I was younger. So, anyways. Oh, okay. A Miracle 1 says, you have not realized fighting both is 2 paychecks instead of 1. Francis could have wanted to fight both. Well, Francis is only going to fight so many times a year, and he's not in danger of not having fights. Now, both of those guys are more marketable than just the average heavyweight, so there's a point. But it wouldn't be very hard for Francis to, if he beats Cyril and he beats Stipe, if they do a rematch, well, then not that you couldn't find somebody for him to fight, but all of a sudden, if Derek Lewis wins 1 or 2, he's right back in there. So anytime you're talking about more than one fight in the future, there's no certainty. So did he possibly lose out? Maybe. But we have no reason to believe that's more likely than something better will happen for him. Because, again, if the argument is the UFC should have waited for a month, essentially that's what the UFC is now asking him to do. Okay, you said you wanted to fight in August or September, so now we fight in October, November. So if it was okay for the entire business to wait for 3 months, 4 months is what it actually ended up being, then it should be fine for one man, even a champ, to wait 3 or 4 months. 2. If Cyril's ready to fight, I'm sure they could get it to go. So I think we should keep an eye on it. I don't think anybody should sweep it under the rug. I mean, maybe there's a pattern developing. Maybe the UFC, doesn't want to have possibly the most marketable fighter in all of combat sports as their champion. Particularly with, McGregor tripping on his own dick so often, beyond the fact he can't win a fight. Francis, with a little bit of consistency, the stories write themselves. You get a couple championship defenses behind Francis, and the knuckleheads aren't going to be able to help themselves. All the casuals, the Stephen A. Smiths and all that stuff, they won't be able to stop themselves. They're going to say, what would it look like if Francis Ngannou, I don't know, fought one of our heavyweight boxers? Now, not in the boxing, but in MMA. Now, of course, they're going to want to see it in boxing. Nobody is generating huge money in the combat realm outside of a few, and most of the crazy events, you know, are of the circus variety right now in boxing. And how much money is being generated versus how much money somebody is reported to being paid is usually a pretty big difference. But I think it's conservative to assume that Ngannou, getting a few defenses, looking as good as he's looked in all of his other fights that he's won, nobody is going to be able to put together a highlight reel like his. Not since Tyson. And so I don't understand why the UFC would want to unnecessarily undermine that path. Some sort of personal grudge, or I don't know, maybe Dana's just an idiot or something. So I'm not sure how that would work. It doesn't seem to serve their own self-interest, is really just my roundabout way of saying that. So. All right. All right. Some pretty good comments. Just trying to look through here. Yeah, so that's the state of things anyway. An interesting time. Only 3.5 hours in. I've missed you bastards, that's for sure. I really appreciate the interaction. A little bit more than a little bit frustrated that the phone didn't work, because I think that was needed. I had too many plates spinning and none of them made any sense. Bringing in some calls would have brought it all together. I think then I would have been able to bounce back and forth. If I just went through all the stuff that I wrote last night, that would sound weird to me. It would make me feel disconnected. Like I was just reading alone in a room to a computer screen. So, sorry if this was a little bit of a strange live stream. Maybe they all are, but that's okay. Well, I think we're finding our way. And I do believe that it is the journey. I mean, I don't go in for most of that woo stuff and the easy aphorisms. But there are some people you can call up, you can call your buddy. Say, man, it's Saturday morning. It's a beautiful day. You want to get in the car and drive somewhere. Are you the kind of person who immediately goes, yeah? Or quick check schedule. Can I get away today? Yeah, let's go. Or are you the kind of person who says, where are you going? Why? Where are we going to end up? And we all fall somewhere on that spectrum. And there's nothing wrong with either. I have very good friends who hate riding in cars. They got to know where they're going. That's their thing, man. It doesn't mean I'm going to love them any less. I've driven across the country, America, literally, probably more times than anybody without a map since Lewis and Clark. And I didn't have a friendly native to help me on the way. That's all I did for years. Every chance I got, I'd just get on roads and I'd drive. And if I had a sense of the direction, I'd try to head in the generally west or generally east, depending on which coast I was heading towards. But I didn't have any place I had to be during those trips. And I just loved that. A little more directed attention is probably a good thing. One thing I did want Oh, I wanted to put this out there, and I didn't get it written up. But I am starting a mailing list. And it's not going to be some bullshit where I market to you, do some marketing to you. I think it's pretty clear I don't give too many shits about subscribers, and I care about the people if they're engaged. I don't care about the numbers. I've not tried to make any money. I've not tried to not make money. Like, if I had a couple videos do well, I didn't refuse to take Google's the small percentage they offered to me. But I think it's pretty clear that's not what I'm in this for. So one of the ways I want to build the opportunity for us to build a community, whoever shows up and is interesting, is I've got a lot of sort of the more in the weeds things that I'm not going to put out on YouTube. Either they're not polished enough, or I don't think they're not widely interesting. The focus is too narrow, and some of it it's like a broken toaster. Like, most of the parts are good, or a toaster oven, or a lawnmower. You're gonna throw the whole thing out, or you're gonna put it out. At the very least, you can put it out by the road for somebody to come by who could make use of it. So I've got a lot of partially built, partially broken, even some little nuggets that are whole and good of all these ideas from just a ton of writing and work that I've been doing over the last couple years. And I'm looking for some outlets. I don't want to have to start a platform and like charge people money, or if I turn this into a business model at some point, maybe it'll make sense to do that, but it'll make sense to all of us, or I won't do it. What's more important to me is to continue doing the creative thing and to have the interactions. So if you want to jump on the mailing list, it's just alpacathesaurus@yahoo.com. That's the email. So send me an email if you wish. I don't even have a graphic today. I'll have it next time. But because I had tried to start a sort of a back channel way to have interactions with people that weren't so public. Because I find it can be onerous to try to have a nuanced or messy conversation about something that has too many people joining in, or just isn't interesting. So it loses steam, because if you're just sitting in a coffee house with your buddy, or coffee shop with your buddy, you can talk all kinds of nonsense, or wherever, a bar. But if all of a sudden they put you on a stage, and even if there's just 12 people watching the conversation, it puts undue influence on the people trying to now you're trying to entertain people. So what I'm saying is, I would like some people to participate in this thing where I can put out some stuff directly, no paywall, no whatever. Probably be a lot of audio content eventually, and I don't want to dump it into a podcast. When I do a podcast, I want it to be good. I want it to be predictably good. So yeah, anyways, kind of rambling on about that. Anyway, brothers and sisters, we've done it again. Yes, we have. And I've maximized my time. If the fetid air in this hotel room is telling me anything, it's time for my dog to go out and visit the bushes. Thanks for the participation and the interest and the good vibes. And we're on this thing now. We're on this together. So I'll keep coming back. You do the same if you want. You're certainly invited. And remember, this isn't supposed to be easy.
There is some sort of a harmony. It is the harmony of overwhelming and collective murder.